Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Blender 101 class. This is week number 4.
That's right.
Lead instructor today will be Mr. Zach Parrish.
Hey!
And next week, and the week after.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we're done, actually.
So, yeah, that'll be the end of Blender
Though,
101.
I've decided, though, that the last assignment that we're going to do for the class is probably actually going to have a 2-week deadline instead of a 1.
Ooh.
And I may have a little kind of open office hours session to kind of close everything off.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Everybody. But we'll look at that kind of down the road. We still got a couple of weeks.
So a couple of things that we need to talk about before we get things rolling. Number 1, for those of you that are trying to use the executable BuzzNet, please discontinue use of that. Throw it away.
Yeah, delete it from your hard drive.
It is no good. Instead, bring up your browser and head over to buzznet.3dbuzz.com. Get signed in and join on in to the Blender 101 class. You will need to be using your login credentials that you use normally on 3dbuzz.com. So join us in there. We have probably a good, 10, almost 20 people. There we go, a few more coming in. We got about 20 people that have not yet joined us in BuzzNet, but are showing up in the webinar. That's number 1. Number 2 thing that we want to talk about, most of you guys that have been with us for many, many years, there are some of you guys that have been with us for almost 10 years now, which is awesome. I just wanted to point out that you guys know us well, but not everyone else may, and we have a tendency to bend over backwards in helping people. And last weekend, while that was fantastic for those that needed the help, it did cause a bit of a, what's the word I'm wanting to use here?
It was problematic from a technical standpoint because we ended up with a class that almost killed our server.
That is very true, because the video after being encoded was nearly, because it's a 3D app that Zach's using, which means once we have long videos with all of the tumbling and everything, there's some pretty heavy megabyte usage there.
Yeah.
And we were looking at almost a half a gig file. And then, of course, we had so many people trying to stream it at the same time. Ended up having to go back in and split the file up into 2 parts, and that made life a little easier for the server. But we really have to avoid staying away from classes that are that long. And not so much for the technical reason, but the big reason is we got several emails throughout the week with people that were expressing a lot of concern about spending as much time as we were on helping others instead of keeping the class going forward.
Yeah.
Not so much that it was a problem last weekend, but their concern is what's going to happen when we get into more technical classes and suddenly we need to spend 5 hours with each person individually. I would like to point out, we are doing these open office hours each week.
Yep.
Please take advantage of them. We're rotating times the best we can to fit our schedule as well. I think the C# numbers have been steadily growing, but I expected that as our technical content becomes more complex. But the Blender class has been averaging around 7 to 8 people. So please, if you're having trouble, try to join in on the open office hours because we can take your screen, we can work with you. And you guys really get that one-on-one attention if you want it. We're here for you.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to PM me with stuff too.
And that's the next thing.
Yeah, so several people out this week via PMs or posts over in the forums. Please though, don't expect me to see every single post in the forums for help. Sometimes I just overlook that stuff. So if you really need my attention, I beg you to send me a PM.
That's right.
Or maybe even an email. But really, my email box these days is just a nightmare. Speaking of which, I think almost all of you sent your, if you've submitted homework, you probably did it in the last 12 hours because my inbox exploded with a whole bunch of assignments when we got close to the deadline. A lot of folks were asking for extensions because of the video problems. I don't have an issue with that. Please get them in, middle of next week would be good. If you can have them in by around Wednesday. I'm still a little flexible. Just don't take don't take too much advantage of me in this, okay? I'm trying to be very understanding, but if I hear from you in 3 weeks, well, you had all those video problems, so it's totally cool for me to turn this in a month later, right? I can still get my certificate. I'm going to probably smack you. So yeah, just get it in as quick as you can. But I
And
understand.
for those of you that
there's some
can't
issues.
send email, Brislin, I just saw that, you can set up a Dropbox.
Yeah, just do a Dropbox account and shoot me a link. Dropbox is very easy to understand.
So easy. And they give you 2 gigs for free.
Yeah, which is more than you'll ever need in this class.
And I found this awesome deal online the other day that if you grab this this special version of Dropbox that had been put together and install it on your Android phone, they would automatically, it took me about 20 minutes, but they said within 30 minutes you get an email from the Dropbox folks. And once you accept it and all, they give you 25 gigs for free. So if you have an Android phone, you already have Dropbox installed, but you're still running with just the 2 gigs setup that you get for free, just search online Dropbox discount 2012. I think that's what I searched.
Yeah.
And if you find it, then simply get rid of the old Dropbox that's on your Android phone, install the new one, and it worked flawlessly for me. So, and they give you that 25 gigs for free for 2 years. So that was a heck of a deal. I'm quite pleased with it. But Dropbox is super simple to use, and with that, there's no excuse to turn in homework ever.
Right.
Okay.
Or no excuse not to.
No excuse not to.
I was with you.
Yeah. Okay.
I was totally with you the whole time.
See, it's Saturday. It's Saturday morning, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And last night was a long.
It was involved.
Night.
Yeah, the morning came by really quick for me. Okay, so today I'm trying to think. Are there any other announcements that I really need to get past?
Let me throw this one out for those of you that are in this class. In case you've not seen the newsletter email yet, we are holding a free 2 to 3 hour UDK, an introduction to UDK class. Zach will be teaching next Thursday.
I hope we can keep it to 2 or 3 hours.
If you have not seen it and you're interested in getting in on it, I know the webinar software, the maximum number of people that we can have in simultaneously is 1,000.
Yeah.
And the class is probably going to be full to their limits. Now, normally we don't do 1,000 ever. Our biggest class has been like 250 people or so.
That was our free Blender class. Wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the free Blender class. But the UDK class has exploded. It's about, let's just put it like this, it's around 500 people already registered, and we're not even 24 hours in since the newsletter started going out. So if you are interested in getting into that class, you need to do so. You guys are already member sponsors, so that's going to work out well for you, because the plan is the moment that class ends, we're going to go ahead and open up registration for the 6-week Blender class.
6-week UDK class.
That's what I meant to say.
I was with you.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's been one of those nights, right?
Man, I'm still a little dizzy. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm so glad that you're keeping a close watch on me now, because I just give away the farm without even realizing.
I got your back.
Thanks, man. So, yeah, again, UDK class, Unreal Development Kit, introduction to it, next Thursday, 6-week class following it, and the 6-week class is going to be, instead of just focusing 6 weeks on making a basic level or something, it's going to be a little bit of everything. So you'll get an introduction to materials. You're going to get an introduction to Kismet. You're going to get an introduction to Unreal Script. So
we've got, it's going to be kind of a special topics class. More details as we are ready to reveal them, though.
So, yeah, exactly. So, anyways, if you guys are interested, you might want to get signed up for the free class sooner than later, because it's going to be cut off. It looks like in the next couple of days it might be completely full. Again, and that's to what Citrix with the webinar software can even handle. All right, so that's it for announcements. Zach, let me go ahead and hand it on over to you, sir.
All right, well, today we've got... we're going to be talking about the following. Let me get my pen up here, make sure I can draw. We're going to be talking about rigging, with an extra space there for some reason, and animation. Now, those of you who have been following along and completing your homework and all that, hopefully you have a file that has at least your animatics in it. If you don't, I'm actually going to be animating without my animatics in the scene, partially because our animation is so simple. But if you want to animate with your animatics in mind, basically by having those in the same file, perhaps on a different layer so you can compare the two, that would be ideal. I have a lot of technical reasons that I'm not actually going to be going that route, and the practice is actually good, because really, if you guys recall our animation from the animatics, it's very easy. And if you're just starting out in Blender, it's good for you to animate one more time. And if you have experience with animation, you should be able to knock that out in a couple of minutes. So either way, no big deal. Now, I want to get a couple of points out of the way, just kind of some things that you should know about this process we're going to be going over. One, there are notes already for you. This is something that I have put together kind of like an experiment. Let me get over here. I got to go to 3D Buzz real quick and get a browser.
And after you do that, go ahead and hit Control-Shift-B.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that hotkey combo. And let's see, over here in the forums.
You can just drag it on onto the screen now.
Yeah.
Ta-da!
There we go. And let's see, right here in the Member Sponsor Lounge, there's Blender 101 Session 4 Rigging and Animation Notes. And this just takes you to a Google Doc that I put together, which is basically an outline of the process we're going to be going over today. So if you find yourself getting stuck, or if you want to follow along and keep things as smooth as they can be, it'd probably be a good idea for you to grab this and either have it loaded up on, on another monitor, on a mobile device maybe next to you, or print it if you want to be all, you want to go kill a tree. So I'm putting that out there just to hopefully make the whole class a little smoother. We haven't done it up to this point. I don't know how well it's going to work this time. I can't vouch that these notes are 150% complete. They might miss a step or two. So if you're using them, if they're printed out next to you, you might want to have a pen ready so you can jot little notes down in the margins, that sort of thing. Something else. For the rigging process, we are not going to be looking at armatures today. All right. For those of you who are familiar with the concept of armatures, armatures allow you to create a skeleton inside of Blender and then basically attach the geometry of your character to that skeleton.
Does your ball really need a skeleton?
It does not need a skeleton. We're just going to do some clever things with modifiers, really, to make him do his thing. Modifiers and constraints, primarily, and a whole lot of empties. And that will basically comprise our rig. But I don't want you guys to make a permanent association that rigging equals armatures. Because rigging is basically taking any object and simplifying the animation process by building a system to make it convenient for an animator. Mm-hmm. And you can rig in any way. Even just parenting one object to another could potentially be considered a rig if it helps make things easier. But again, we're not going to be going into the whole process of armatures. That's something I'm going to save for a special topics character class a little bit down the road. Next, we are once again going to be talking about animation. And my goal here is not to make you a professional animator in this class. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of it. We've already seen a little bit of it when we did the animatics. But really, for the most part, I want you guys just to be following along, kind of like a do-as-I'm-doing routine. If you want to become a full-on animator, it's going to take a lot of time and study and practice on your part. That's, again, not entirely our goal today. As a matter of fact, the big thing we're going to be looking at, this is the big kind of definition I want you guys to have in mind today, is a keyframe. I've spent years of my life now wanting to do this. Jason, what is the definition of a keyframe?
I don't know.
Come on, help me out.
It's the recording of some particular parameter's value at a given point in time.
Exactly.
Zach, how many keyframes do we need to actually see animation?
2.
At least 2. Why, Zach?
Well, I'll get to that. Hang on a second. I'm drawing stuff right now.
So, you can't look it up in the book, Zach.
Property at time. That's like the simplest way to say it. It is the recording of a property's value at a given time. You need at least 2 keyframes to have animation. Now, this is kind of a representation of a graph editor. And you guys are going to be playing with one of these today. You've already played with one a little bit.
Let's pretend it's not a graph editor at the moment. Let's just pretend it's a graph. Going horizontally across the bottom, you'll see we have time. Vertically, we have value of the property.
That's right. Now, to have animation, we need a change over time. So we need one state at a given point in time, and we need another state at another given point in time. And the transition between the two becomes animation. Now, this is the interesting part right here. This is the part we're going to spend a little bit of time playing with today, and you've already seen this. This is your animation curve. And if you're just getting into animation for the first time ever, this is probably the most daunting, terrifying, scary part of animation there is.
Because it just magically appeared between your 2 keyframes.
It did. That's the way keyframe animation works inside of a computer. It's an interpolation curve. That's your computer saying, all right, you need to be at this point at one time, and you need to be at this point at another time. I'll tell you what, I'll do all the work for you, and I'll get you there during this time. But the neat thing about this is this curve actually controls where you are on each individual frame, and you have the power to manipulate this curve and change the behavior of your animation. For instance, right now, I'm going to make my eraser slightly smaller. Right now, this is a linear relationship. Now, I'm just going to kind of cut my eyes over to BuzzNet to see who's following along. Can anybody, as simply as possible, describe the type of animation this would be if it was a perfectly straight line going from point A to point B? What would the animation look like? Somebody just said constant. There you go. And yeah, there's a few other things coming here. Somebody said going up. Well, that's a dangerous place to look, because really this curve could be defining anything. It's not necessarily going upward. It could be controlling the animation of the scale of something. It could be an animation of the color of something. It's not necessarily going up at all. It's just a change in value. As a matter of fact, if
motion in X.
It could be motion in X. Yeah, we could be going sideways.
Yep.
There's all kinds of different things this could be defining right now. So don't get stuck in your head that when you see a curve going up that your object is going up, because that's just going to make things harder on you.
Wait.
Go ahead.
It could be an entire hand closing into a fist.
Sure. Or if you set up the relationship the right way, it could actually be something going down instead of up.
That's right.
So a lot of people have said it would be constant motion. And that's right. What you would have is an object which spontaneously started moving or changing. Its value would change. Let's assume there's motion because it's just easier to explain.
Sure.
We'd have an object that would spontaneously start moving with no acceleration. It'd just be like immediately up to its constant speed. It would remain at that speed, and then it would just immediately stop at the end. Now, and this is going to be fun because all we've basically got is chatting people. So Gav, if you want to kind of voice in to help out, by all means, go for it. What kind of motion is defined here?
Smooth.
Yeah, but help me out here. What would that actually look like? If that was different?
Oh, come on.
Oh,
there's a term for this in the industry. Do not make me get on a plane and come visit you in the UK right now.
I'm game. Let's go.
Well, people are shouting Bezier very loudly in the chat.
Well, that's true.
And there aren't any Bezier handles, so I assumed it was a smooth.
Well, it could
are
be.
you looking for
Just
slow in, slow out?
Sure. Describe to me, if this was motion, what would the motion look like?
It would start off with little change, and then the change would speed up, and then the change would slow down and stop.
That's right. We accelerate up to our full speed.
Let's use the word ease for a moment.
That's right. We ease in and ease out.
Ease in and ease out, that's it. Yep.
Actually,
if you want to be specific about it, it's ease out, ease in.
Ease out and ease in.
Yeah.
So what we're doing
for me,
Go ahead, Gav.
Sorry, lag killing me. For me, I always look at it as just from the maths end. That's the thing. The angle is the rate of acceleration.
That's true. You can look at it that way. So since we're starting off here at almost completely flat at the very beginning, we have almost no motion, and then we accelerate, and right about here when we reach our steepest angle, that's going to be full speed. And then the curve starts to flatten itself back out as we slow down to a stop. And actually, there's a little bit of a downstroke there, so we'd actually kind of go backward.
Yeah, we have a little bit of overshoot.
But that's because I don't have the steadiest hand in the world at the moment. Actually, that brings up another point as well. What would this animation look like?
Hold shift. Oh, okay, never mind.
What would happen here, Gavin?
Jason's already said it. You would overshoot. You'd go past and then come back again, which is handy in sort of coming to rest animations.
Mm-hmm. And the point that I'm trying to make here is we have all these different kinds of curves, but we haven't changed our points at all. We're using the exact same keyframe values, and we're modifying that behavior.
Hold shift.
Here's one more. You want to hold shift for this?
Yeah.
All right.
Wait. How are you getting the change in the middle?
Binary.
How are you getting the change in the middle?
Well, what do you mean? How am I getting the change in the middle?
Yeah.
No, that's not vertical. There's definitely.
Oh, okay.
Where's the keyframe in the middle?
I see what you're saying.
There we go.
So
that's
something like that.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Awesome. Now we're in math class.
I'm just trying to kind of fill in that line down there.
There we go.
Better.
Yeah, that looks good. So what's this, Kevin?
That's a binary operator.
Sure.
It's a step. Well, it is.
It's a step.
Off and then on.
Yeah.
It's a step.
Yeah, this is good for blinking, or just
Yeah. So let's say
position.
you had a light and you wanted to set up a hall scene with a real creepy blinking on and off type feel. Then you'd have something like this. So let's say the keyframe on the bottom left represents an off state for the light, or at least turned very, very dim. And then the second keyframe further to the right in the graph represents the intensity being turned all the way up. This would simply hold the very low or off value for a specific amount of time, and then it would instantly have its maximum amount of light that we've dictated there in that second keyframe. So it's a stepped value.
Right. Now, another thing, too, and this is just something, some food for thought. If you were animating the position of a camera, this would be a great way to do a camera cut with a single camera.
That's right.
Because you'd have one position here at your first keyframe, and then another position over here, and you would change instantaneously from one position to the next. So you can animate things like camera cuts in this fashion as well.
So with animation, the bottom line is you go in, you set up keyframes, and then the computer is going to interpolate between all of these keyframes. But fortunately for us, we have quite a bit of control for going in and fine-tuning that interpolation that the computer figures out.
Exactly. And that's the key. That's the heart of animation.
Yeah,
right
that
there.
wraps today up. So you guys have a good one?
Yeah, we're done. We're out of here now. So that leads us over to Blender. Now, again, I've got my file set up a little bit differently than you guys. If you still have your animatics in your scene and you want to animate to those, please, by all means, go ahead. I'm going to be working in a fashion where I won't. I'm actually going to be creating everything kind of from scratch today. So what I want to do first is create our rig for our ball character. Now, again, I do have notes for everybody to follow along. Basically, the entire process has been documented as cleanly as I think it can be. If I missed a step or something isn't written down or I misspelled something, my apologies in advance. But these are the notes that I'm going to be following along with.
And Zach, if you don't mind, before we get started with this part here, let's go ahead and take a quick look down our questions panel, since it's kind of a nice segue.
Let's see. The first one we've got is I have my models from last week and the animations from week 1 on the same file and layer. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. That shouldn't make any problems at all. It might be a good idea, maybe, to take your animatics and shift them over to another layer. Of course,
would.
All you got to do to do that is just select all of the objects involved in your animatics and press the M key. M as in Michael.
Or Mommy.
Or Mike. And move those over to another layer just to kind of get them out of the way. So you can turn them off and you can just, you can turn that layer on to see how you're meshing up and leave it at that. Let's see, somebody else. And let's see, I have clicked on Alt a few times by mistake. Will that be a problem? Oh, clicked on Alt A a few times. I mean, does that mean I have animation that I don't need? Quite possibly, but since we're going to be reanimating today anyway, that should be all right. Why is my hill gone? Because this is a different file, basically. And since the hill is pretty easy to make, when the time comes, I'm just going to slap together a new one. It's just a 16 by 16 grid, and then we pull the middle up about 3.5 units, and we're happy. So,
and then one other thing real quick. I'm quite a ways away from the third monitor on the far left, but I did see somebody say earlier, Zach, and it looked like a question. Please make sure to put your questions in the questions panel, just like we say in the C# class. Any questions that get put into BuzzNet, we can't be responsible for answering those because with all of the chatter going on, it's very easy for us, if we were to be looking at BuzzNet constantly, to get distracted ourselves from the content in the course. So please make sure to put your questions over in the questions panel, and if it's something that you want us to specifically answer, and that will put it up right in front of us.
Right. Somebody said how to disable the animatics layer. Just make sure it's not selected down here in your layers across the bottom of your 3D view. Any layer that you are not looking at, so for instance, if I just switch over to this layer, I keep the Windows bar from popping up. You can hold down Shift and select multiple layers. So if you're working on layer 1, but you've moved your animatics back here, just make sure that layer is not selected, and you won't be able to see what's on it. So that's the easiest way to turn it off. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take certain of my objects, basically everything here, and I'm going to tap the M key and move these over to the first layer. just because that seems to make things a lot easier on everybody. And let's see, what else is left over here? Just these lights, I think, which I'll end up throwing away. They were just convenient while I was working and texturing and doing stuff. So there we go, and now we can just jump back over to this layer. It still says there's something over here. That's what that little gray dot basically designates, is that there's something hiding over here, and right now, I don't much care. So, let's see, my objects are still animated even though they are in a different layer, and they will be. If they have animation on them, they're still going to be moving around. I'm not sure what you mean, though. It doesn't seem like that should be problematic for you. My homework does not have the character rendered as you have shown now. You must render my homework. How is this done? I'm not sure what you mean. Your character should, hopefully, have some texture on it. If it doesn't, that's okay. You can add the texture back in a little later. But we technically haven't
Which
done
homework
render.
are you talking about?
Yeah.
The modeling or the texturing?
Maybe the GLSL setting. Okay, yeah, if your viewport is showing something a little different, let me just show you my settings at the moment. I'm using GLSL shading and textured solid as active, and then of course make sure you tap Alt-Z, and that's going to show your textures. So yeah, now let's see. I think that's everything.
Except for, I believe it was Jane that had said earlier about the open office hours, that some people are at work, and that's why we're doing our best to rotate times. So that we can help accommodate everyone, because it is so difficult. We actually got blessed out in an email the other day for the Unreal class, the free one being held at 3 p.m. Central Time on Thursday.
Did you see that?
I did. Where?
Oh, I didn't.
What did he say?
He said you're holding the class when all decent, God-fearing citizens are at work.
Yeah, very good quote. Very good.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I know at that time it's like
Made my
eight.
whole day.
Da, 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 da.
Yep. That's like 8 o'clock at night over in the UK, you know.
America.
So,
Gosh, yes.
So our apologies. We do try to rotate times. I mean, if you think about it, here we are teaching on a Saturday. We teach Thursday nights late. We teach Mondays early. I mean, we've got classes all over the place, so we're doing the best we can, guys.
Yeah.
And we're recording these and putting them up so that you can watch whenever.
And
we're not shutting the PM system down.
Right. If you can't attend an open office session, but you have a question or you are stuck, please just PM me your
That's
question.
right.
Write it out as best you possibly can. I have been actually handling
Crayons.
those in class.
Crayons are fine.
Exactly. Just write it out in purple crayon.
Okay, so here we go.
Okay, so yeah, here we go. The first thing I want to do is rig up our character. Now, hopefully you've got some objects around that you're going to be able to work with. The golf ball, I'll just go ahead and give everybody a heads up right now. What we're going to be doing is rigging up the character. I didn't mean to do that. And the club. And we're not going to really need a rig for the golf ball and the golf tee. Those are kind of just objects that we'll animate by hand, making them fly around a little later. But in terms of the actual demonstrated animation you will see on this video, I am just going to get you the ball bouncing up the hill with his squash and stretch. Then, using the rig that we're going to put together over the next few minutes, it's going to be your responsibility to animate him swinging his club and doing the whole nine. Now, one more time. For those who need to see it, and this is, I'm sure that lag will kill you if I leave this at full screen. So I'm going to make this
more full screen.
More full screen. Apparently, that was miserable what I just did. Let me shrink this down. So hopefully this will make things a little easier. You guys are going to be responsible for handling the rest of the animation. So I'm going to get you this really great little bounce sequence. All of this is going to be you guys. Now, here's the great thing. If you're already like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Well, we handled most of this in the animatics. You already saw how to do this. The whole twisting and watching the ball, his follow-through, if you will, that's all handled with just a single slider on our rig. So that won't be a problem for you at all. And the ball and the tee, the actual golf ball, really, that's just kind of flying away. I'm just, from one frame to the next, that's just being moved off camera. That's really all there is to that. You could just as easily make them invisible because they disappear that quickly. So this is what we're just going to be doing, the bounce, and then the actual swing process I'm going to leave up to everybody. Just so everyone's clear on what we're going to be doing. All right, so before we actually get rolling, we are 30 minutes in. And what I want to do right now is I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to let everybody take just like a 2-minute break, just real quick. Stand up, stretch your legs, get a sip of coffee, whatever you need to do. And then when we come back, we're going to jump into this rigging process for our character. So I'm going to go ahead and pause right now. All right, we're back from our instantaneous break for those of you watching the video. And a couple of questions rolled in while folks were away. Is it okay to animate before baking and such? Well, you know, if you've already got your UVs laid out, it shouldn't make any difference, but a nice way to kind of double check, because if you've got any modifiers or you've changed the shape of your character, it could actually end up affecting your texture a little bit. But what you could do is just open up a separate file where there is no animation and do your baking there, because as long as your characters have the same UVs, you can use the same texture. You can just bring a texture into any file. So if you haven't done your baking and you still need to do all that, what I would do is save as, and I would do my texture baking and the remainder of my texture work over in that non-animated file, and then bring everything over. It's just a texture file. Go back into your animation file and create your material, etc. and so forth. And that should be fine. It shouldn't cause any problems. Let's see, another one. I think I have to scroll up a little because I might have missed a couple. Oh, so yeah, okay, the key press thing is already done. We've already got that. Sorry if this seems like a remedial question. How do you move things between layers again? Press the M key, Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster. Let's see. You could turn on key press. Already got that. Fantastical. And let's see. Hey, Zach. I've been in the hospital all week because my girlfriend required surgery, emergency abdominal surgery. I'm very sorry to hear that. With that said, my week 3 homework is at 80%. You actually have a progress bar for your homework? That's amazing. Can I have until midnight to send it to you? I send a photo as proof that this is my situation. No excuses. This is a valid reason. I gave everybody till like Wednesday, dude, because we had those video problems earlier. And you guys will find sooner or later that I'm a pretty laid back guy when it comes to all this stuff. So just don't take super advantage of me, okay? Don't come back 3 weeks from now when the classes are be like, hey, I got week 3 done.
Well, they have to balance your laid backness with my I'm not. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. With your iron fist. So everything should be fine there. Somebody said, I didn't see week 3. Will doing it after following along today affect working with UVs? Again, I would... it should be all right to handle it that way. You know, at worst... Mr. Christensen, at worst, you might end up doing a little bit of extra work for the animation, but you should be able to lay out the UVs on your animated object with no problems. That should be just fine. So you can follow along with a fully animated scene, but if you are worried about making your texture and the changed shape of your object, because he is going to change shape. He's going to squash and stretch and bend and flex and all this kind of stuff today. If you're worried about that, you could do all that in a separate file, but really, it should be just fine. I don't imagine anybody's going to have any problems with that. It is a little out of order, but at worst, even if you ended up just doing it twice, like if you animated now and then you animated again later, it's just more practice for you, and I think it would be a really good idea for you to see that at least a couple times. Let's see, somebody else says, Winnie Butt said, would using Dropbox be easier on your email box, Zach? My email box doesn't much care. But, yeah, Dropbox is great. It does make things a little easier.
It does make things easier.
Yeah, so by all means, just send me a Dropbox link. It also means that it keeps things better organized on your system, I'm sure, because you've got that one Dropbox folder somewhere on your computer, so you know right where all your assignments are hiding.
Just make a homework folder and drag drop.
Pretty much what I do. Let's see, and then Chris says, oh, never mind, I figured it out. Too late, I answered your question, so I still win. Are using the BuzzNet participate to you as... Oh, hold on. Hang on. The reading of that just broke my head. As you could not reset it last week. Do we have the reset button in BuzzNet these days? Does it work?
You can try it.
No. Oh, wait. Oh.
Yes, it did.
Okay, yeah. I said everybody not ready. That's pretty crazy. So, yeah, it seems to work. I have noticed...
It is flaky, and Nelson and I were more focused in our free time this past week getting the video system worked out. Right. To handle the heavier demand that we're now seeing at 3D Buzz. But so probably later this weekend, that's something Nelson will be looking at again. So it is a little flaky, but if it starts crapping out on us, not a problem. We'll just move back over to using the hand method over in the webinar system.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to move over to the rigging process for our character. Now, once again, I am going to be following along with the notes that I've already published for everybody. So if you guys want to use those as well, by all means, do so. So here we are with our character. And the first thing we need to do is get the origin down toward the bottom. Now, in my case, the origin is already at the bottom, but let's say yours wasn't. Let's say your origin was at the center of the character, maybe floating way up here. We need to fix that. Notice that I have moved my character down to the grid. So he's sitting right on top of the center of the scene, 0, 0, 0 in all cases. This is where we want the origin to be, right here at his base. The way we're going to do that is to hit Shift-A, not Shift-A, hang on, Shift-S, thank you. And we're going to send the cursor over to the center, like so. That puts the 3D cursor right there at the base of our character. So if your character is anywhere else, go ahead and center up your 3D cursor, position your character right on top of it like so. Once that's done, hit Control-Alt-Shift-C all together now. And you're going to send the origin to the 3D cursor, and that will put your character's origin right there at his base. That will make things a lot easier as we move forward. You could probably get away without having to do this, but later on, once we handle like twisting for our character, having that origin down there is going to make the twist much more believable. All right, our next step is to create the ball control setup. Now, this is part of the rig itself. In fact, this is going to be the primary aspect of our rig, being just a single object that we can select and manipulate. It will be what we animate to move the character through the scene. It will also have all of our additional controls for making the character squash, stretch, bend, twist, and all those other things. So I'm going to hit Shift-A, and I'm going to add in an empty. Now, when you add in anything in your scene, your very next step should generally always be to name this. So I'm going to name this guy Ball Control. It could be character control. You can name it anything. You can name it football if you want to. But now that we've got that in place, we are ready to use it as the primary part of our rig. To do this, just grab your character, hold down Shift, grab your empty, hit P, or, sorry, let me hit escape because I just brought in game mode. Let me hit Control P and parent to object. Sorry, it's been that kind of morning. And it'll probably continue to be that kind of morning.
Oh,
so,
I'm sure.
Control P will do a parenting operation. And now this means you can grab your ball control and check it out. You move it around, the character moves too. Of course, parenting. Fantastic, easy stuff. Now here's the cool part. Gav, don't. We need to handle squash and stretch now. The way we're going to handle squash and stretch is not with a deformer. Really, the biggest reason for that is I thought the deformer looked terrible, so we're going to use a constraint instead. I did notice a couple of questions popped in real quick. Let me address those. Could you show us your Club UV layout sometime, please? Sure thing. In just a minute. And my origin is at a funky position. Well, Robert Preston, one of my favorite actors, by the way, but he's dead now, all you got to do is first get your 3D cursor to the center of the scene. Do that with Shift-S, cursor to center. And then select your character and hit Control-Alt-Shift-C and send your origin to the 3D cursor. And that should solve your problem. All right. Now, moving on from here, to handle squash and stretch, what we're going to use is a scale constraint, or a special kind of scale constraint, actually, called Maintain Volume. So over in your Properties window, if you go under Constraints, click Add Constraint, and drop on Maintain Volume. Now here's the trick. What this does is it allows you to scale the character in one axis, and the other two axes will scale in the opposite direction proportionally. So mathematically speaking, whatever it is you're scaling will maintain the same volume. What you do is you choose what axis you want to do all your primary scaling on. And since we want to scale this guy up and down, we need to set the free axis over to Z. Don't mess with volume, and you can leave everything else right where it is. If you want to test it, go over here, and let's see. Let's just hit S for scale, and I'll middle mouse drag until we get on Z. And he just looks like he's scaling, really. Unless I'm crazy. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell.
No,
it looks like his
does appear to just be scaling.
It looks like his local axis is probably something other than what I thought it was. So what I'm going to do real quick is hit Control Space and switch over to local and check it out. His local axis is actually Y pointing up, so that's fine. All I got to do is take my free axis and set it to Y. No worries. Now if I scale him again, there you go. So now he's actually squashing and stretching. Now that's pretty much it for handling our squash and stretch control. We're just going to be using this constraint. Now, later on, we won't be animating this. The name of the constraint, by the way, is maintain volume, located here in the transform constraints. If I was to really stretch out my properties area, you can see it kind of keeps that name, but you've got to have a tremendous amount of screen space to be able to see all that. Now, again, we won't actually be animating the scale directly. We're going to handle that via a special control that we're going to set up a little later. But that's really all we need in order to be able to handle squash and stretch. Now we need to set up the controls for our bend behavior. And this will... I don't want to say it's going to confuse you, but it has the potential to. So the modifier is going to require that we have a special pivot that we're going to set up. And if you lose track, please pay attention to those notes I put out, because they will make this process much easier on you. So with your character selected, I'm going to go over to Modifiers. And you'll notice I've still got a smooth modifier on here, a subdivision surface modifier. I'm so used to calling it smoothing, but that's from years of doing all kinds of other 3D applications. It does smooth things. What we're going to do is add on a simple Deform modifier. Now you'll notice that's under the list of deforming modifiers. So just drop that on, and we're going to move it up. I don't want this to take place after my subdivision surface. I want it to take place before, so I'm going to nudge it up one. That means it's actually deforming the original geometry, and then the subdivision surface smoothing is actually taking place. Now, we want to set the type of deformer for this to bend. Because this deformer can actually do a lot of different things. I mean, it can twist, it can taper, it can stretch. We want to use bend specifically. And if you play with its value, you see that it looks kind of wacky. The pivot is sort of weird. And what it's doing is it's bending around the z-axis for the local object. And that's just how it's working. What we're going to do instead is we're going to create a special object just to help us bend this guy properly. That looks amazing, by the way. It's like some part of me actually wants to keep that. So here's how we're going to do this. We need to create an origin object specifically for this modifier. To do this, I'm going to grab our ball control empty, and I'm going to duplicate it. So hit Shift-D to duplicate. And I'm just going to right-click because I don't want that to move or go anywhere. Now, something you can do to make this a little easier to select, this is just sort of a temporary thing, because you'll notice it's stacked on top of the ball control, which makes it a little hard to click. You can temporarily set this to another display type. Now, this is found in the Properties window underneath Object Data, which looks like a little empty icon. Change the display from plain axes to something like a cube, and suddenly it's a lot easier to select that guy. In fact, what I'm going to do is make it a cube, but I'm going to make it kind of small. Now, once you have that, let's also go ahead and name it. So I'm going to jump back over to the object properties. And the name I'm going to give this is Ball Deformer Empty. Just something so we'll be able to select it and know what it is. We also need this object to follow our ball control. We can't have this being left behind. So we're going to select it, hold down Shift, select the ball control, hit Control-P, and parent that to the object. Somebody asked, why is your green up? It's just because that's the way my particular object is oriented. It's the local rotation on the character itself. If yours isn't, that's actually okay. You just need to be aware of which axis is pointing up because you want to scale him in that direction. So if yours is X or Z or anything else, just make sure that under your constraint for maintain volume, that the up pointing axis is the one that you set your free axis to.
Is there an equivalent to the editing the pivot in Max, aligning to the world? Like a quick reset?
You should be able to, it's Control-A, I believe, to apply location, rotation, and scale. And
oh, yeah, that's right.
That should reset it back to the world. But really, I'm just going with whatever I see here. It's fine. It doesn't really change anything in our case, because the only time that we're really going to be affecting the local axis is just here for this one constraint. Everything else, all the other key points of our animation, are just using this little ball control, and he's already aligned to the world anyway.
Yeah, I think just years of using Max has made me paranoid about it.
Blowing
something up later.
And it certainly will. Okay, so we've got our new empty created. I'm going to jump back over to my modifiers on the character. So let's select him, go over to modifiers, and over here under our simple deform, you see that we've got this origin area. Click on the little empty, or on the little text field here, and it's going to allow you to choose any other object in the scene. And the one we want to choose specifically is the ball deformer empty. Once that's active, check relative. This means that you're deforming relative to that object's location and relative to its axes. And now we're most of the way there, but we've got to adjust the rotation of that object. So what I'm going to do is crank this up a bit, and it's kind of pinching him together, which is cool. You can see what it's doing, actually. It's rotating, again, around the z-axis, but since z is vertical, it's just kind of pinching him in. We're going to take the Y rotation of the ball deformer empty and offset it by 90 degrees. Now that we've done that, if we come back over to our deformer, you can see that this bends our character forward and back. And I'm going to give everybody just a second to sort of catch up, and I'm going to attempt to reset everybody's ready status. Which it doesn't look like it wants to reset. I had my one chance of resetting, and I blew it already. So when you are finished with this, once you have it up to this point, please go ahead and update your ready status to let me know that you're there.
The thing that that really used to fox me with this is when it comes to, you get so used to, if you're moving in a particular direction, you start thinking about moving in a particular axis. But when it comes to rotating and these sort of bendy modifiers, you have to remember that the axis that you're talking about is the axle of the wheel, if you like. It's
sure.
What you're rotating around, and that getting your head around that can I still have to stop and think, right? Which axis is this actually rotating around?
Somebody just asked if I could show the ball deformer empties transform window again. So this should show you all of the transforms for it. Basically, its rotation is 090. All right, so I'm going to go way out on a limb here and figure that most folks who are needing to catch up are pretty much there. And again, if I see some people over in BuzzNet who are saying that they're falling behind or they're lost. In fact, one person said they're going to take notes and follow along later. I've done most of the note work for you because I am kind of a nice guy today.
But in all reality, that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, it is an awesome idea. Because me personally, anything I write down basically gets committed to my brain pretty much forever. And somebody said, what steps did I just show? Well, I just made it all the way through step 4 for bend behavior, basically. That's how far down we are.
Yeah, like usual, when today's class is over, I will try to be nice and fast about getting it encoded and uploaded. So if you are having trouble keeping up in real time with Zach, what I would suggest is simply taking notes on top of the notes he gave you, or just additional notes. It won't hurt.
Yeah, doodle in the corners.
And then go back through the video once it gets up in a little while and actually do it, because then you can pause, you can back up. And again, if you get stuck, fire off a PM to Zach. You'll get help back.
Oh, somebody did say, how did you get the box instead of the point? Well, if you have an empty selected, you can go over to its object data, which is available in the properties editor. And you can change its display type to all kinds of stuff. You can set it to a cube, you can set it to a sphere, you can set it to a cone. You get all kinds of great things you can set it to. I just set mine to a cube. But really, when you're done with it, here's the great thing. This is kind of like the unmentioned step. Well, I guess it is kind of mentioned. You can just take the size of this, and once you're happy, just set it to 0.01, and it makes the thing effectively invisible. Now, there's other things you could do alternatively. You could kill its selectability and visibility up here inside the outliner. So if I stretch this out so everybody can see that. You have ball deformer empty. You could just turn this off and make it unselectable. And of course, that's just as good. But, if you're ever worried that you might, turn it on and then bump it and nudge it, something else you can do is just tuck it away by setting its size to virtually non-existent. Okay, so moving on to our next operation, we're going to add in the twist behavior, which is basically what we're going to use to make the character look left and right. So we're going to select the character, jump over to our properties editor and go back over to our modifiers once again. And we're going to add on a brand new simple deform. So the same type of modifier we had a second ago. Make sure you bump this up just so that it's taking place before any subdivision surface that you may have on your object. It doesn't really matter if this takes place before or after your bending. It's not going to change things that drastically either way. But that's really because I'm not doing a lot of both of these at the same time. When he's twisting, he's generally not bending, and vice versa. So we're going to leave the type set to twist. And you can just kind of play with the factor and see what this does. You see we're definitely twisting, but he's twisting down his own local z-axis, which is not very helpful. And it looks kind of like he's melting and kind of herp-derping at us. So what we're going to do is take his origin, and we're just going to set this over to the ball control object. And we'll switch this over to relative. And he immediately starts twisting like so. Now this part I don't believe I actually added to the notes, so you might want to just kind of jot this down. You can also adjust your limits a bit to help control how he's twisting. So like if you don't want the bottom of him to twist very much, you can increase that lower limit and you can pull down the upper limit as well. And the idea is to just kind of fine-tune this to a point where he's just kind of subtly twisting a little at the waist, and that's it. And I'm going to pull down that upper just a little, because I don't want his eyes to flex around too much. There we go. And maybe just pull a little bit more back in there. Not too much, though. So in this case, I'm using 0.24 and 0.35. So really all of the twisting is taking place right there at the kind of the bottom of his belly. And that's pretty much all of it. Did I check relative just then? Yes, I did, because you need relative to make sure that you are performing your operation relative to the axes of your origin object. And that may not be in the notes. It's just, I really intended these notes to be something just to kind of help you catch along. But yes, you do want to check relative.
And we had another question. What happens if you applied the sub-D already?
It shouldn't matter. You're still going to be doing the same thing, essentially. If you still have your sub-D modifier on there, it would probably be better to leave that at the very end. But if you don't, you just have a whole bunch of geometry now, the modifier will still do its work. It's still going to twist your character. You just may notice that certain things look a little different than mine because you're moving so many vertices. Still, it's not a big problem. The change, the difference should be negligible. Not enough to really write home about. All right, and I'm looking for folks. I'm just going to kind of assume that that was pretty easy to set up, and everybody should be with me now. So now it's time for us to set up the golf club. Essentially, we're done with the operations that our ball needs to do. Now, he's not, this is not the whole of the rig. We still have some custom properties that we're going to set up to help us handle squashing and stretching and twisting and all those things. Because what we don't want to have to do is force ourselves as animators, or force the animator if we're doing this for somebody else. We don't want somebody to have to select the character and go over to the modifiers area and control things inside of here. It's just too messy, and it's way too likely that somebody could break something. So it's inconvenient and dangerous. But the primary functionality that we need our character to do is now in place. Now, to set up the club, the first thing we're going to do is set up an empty, which will act as the origin for the club, whenever possible. I don't like animating objects directly, if I can help it. With some simple things, it doesn't really matter. Like, for instance, we've got this golf ball and a golf tee that we are just going to select the geometry, or you will, actually. I'm not going to be handling it most likely in this video. That's going to be something for you to do later. But in that case, it's such a simple animation, excuse me, that selecting the geometry and dropping some keyframes on it isn't a big deal. Most of the time, though, I like to animate indirectly. I will create some kind of an object, like an empty or something, and I will animate that, and I'll just parent whatever it is I'm animating to that object. Why do you do that? Well, it allows you the power to offset your position or your rotation by a little bit. If you need to make subtle changes later on down the road, you can leave whatever it is you actually animated. You can leave your empty object alone and make subtle tweaks to the geometry. It's also a lot easier to swap out an object. So if you wanted to create animation with a temporary object because something wasn't fully modeled or wasn't fully textured, or maybe you just need something to take the place, then you have something parented in, just swap out what you need and you're good to go. So for starters, we're going to create an empty that is going to be the primary object we animate for our club. Let's move my club somewhere over here. Doesn't really matter where it goes. And let's do this. Let's hit Shift S, and I'm going to snap the cursor to selected, which brings our 3D cursor right here to the location of the origin. Then I'll hit Shift A, and let's add in another empty. Immediately name this empty. We're going to call this, what are we going to call this? Club root.
Gerald.
Yeah, we're going to call this Gerald. Also, and this is just for me so that I don't go too crazy, that is a huge empty. It's just way bigger than I need it to be. So I'm going to take the size and pull it down a little. And that's just kind of a personal preference thing. I don't want it to go all the way down to 0.1 though. That's okay, somewhere right about there where I can still see it, but it's not completely dominating. Now, I'm going to move this up toward the top of the handle, maybe about halfway down the handle. The exact location for it is not all that important, so you don't have to really stress that. Just get it somewhere around where the handle is. And then you want to rotate the empty such that the local Z-axis points down the handle. You can do this in one of two ways. You can rotate the empty, or you can rotate the club. It doesn't really matter. The big thing we're aiming for here is to make sure that local Z-axis, and you'll notice I'm set to local, so you can see that local axis, that Z is pointing down the club, like so. That's going to make things a lot easier. When you're finished, make sure you parent the club to the empty. So we'll have the club selected, hold down Shift, select the empty, hit Control-P, and parent to the object like so. Now, that's really all of the rigging that we need for the club. The great thing that this allows us to do is we're just going to be changing the position of this this little empty. And if I slip at some point while we're talking and I call these locators, please don't hold that against me. That's a Maya thing. It says you were holding Control while rotating the club to make it snap then? Actually, no. I just kind of eyeballed it. All I did was I used the middle mouse button to constrain my rotation down to the X-axis, I think. And then I just got it close. It does not have to be exactly set in a specific direction. Some of you actually might have modeled your club such that maybe the head of it is perfectly flat and the handle goes out at an angle. So, if you modeled it like this, then actually choosing an exact rotation may not be the most helpful thing for you anyway. So really all I did was I tapped R, middle mouse clicked over to the X-axis, and just spun this guy around like so. Just eyeball it. Close is close enough. And let's see, what else? So now that we've got that, we're ready. And what I was saying earlier was we're going to be using... Oh, I need to clean up my rotation very slightly. Excuse me. We're just going to be adjusting the position and rotation of this empty, and the club will come along for the ride, which of course is the great thing. But we're never actually going to touch and animate this when animation comes. The motion and rotation of this will be handled as part of our rig, and all we're going to have to do as an animator is just change the value of a slider. And that will make things very easy. Okay, so now we need a couple more empties. Actually, we need a few more. The first one we're going to create is called our club carry empty, and what this is a way to designate the position of where the club is going to be when it's being carried at the character's side. So, here's how I'm going to do this. We're going to take our 3D cursor, I'm going to put it back to the center. So just Shift S, cursor to center, like so. Then we'll hit Shift A and add another empty. To make it a little easier to select, I'm going to go ahead and slide it off to the side and then immediately name this. We'll call this Club Carry. And his whole job, again, is just to designate the position that the club is going to be at when it's being carried. And somebody said, should the character be twisting to his left slightly? It doesn't make much of a difference right now. Once we set up our final controls to drive that twist, then all of that's going to come out in the wash. So if right now you've got a little bit of twisting going on, you should probably just check the factor of your modifier. And that's probably what's going on. You probably have a factor of something like 0.35 or something crazy. Okay, if it's slightly, it's probably 0.1. But that's really all it is. If you set this back to 0, then your character should, hopefully, be looking dead forward.
I think is your squash and stretch
He probably is scaled
non-zero at the moment.
Yeah, he probably is scaled just a little bit. If we double check, well, no, it's just the aspect of the camera. When he gets down there in the corner, the camera's aperture and lens, the focal size, makes him kind of skew a little. No big deal, though. So yeah, everything is still zeroed out. And let's see, 0 made it more so, now that you're twisted even more. All right, well, Miranda, congratulations. I'm going to look at your screen. So you're about to become a presenter, so I can see your screen. Because I don't know what would cause that to happen right off the top of my head. I just have to find you in the list of all these people. Alphabetical order is wonderful. There we go. Make presenter. Hello, Miranda. We might not be able to hear you. It's okay if you don't have a speaker or anything. Okay, so let's see. I'm looking at a factor on your twist of 0.35, which is that default value. Yep, set that back to 0. Oh, look at all that. Your twisting went away, and everybody was happy. And there was much rejoicing. That was easy. So, yeah, now she's not... She immediately took her screen away. That's awesome. She's done. Okay, so let me set myself back over to the presenter. Let's see. Hang on. Right-click, myself, okay, yeah, I know how to use this software. Really, I swear. And show my screen. And just to be on the safe side, I'm going to make sure that Miranda gets muted. Okay, so yeah, no problem. Just keep in mind that you do have a couple of different modifiers that are stacked up, and it's real easy to get the two confused. The great thing about what just happened is that it illustrates why we're going to need to set up further controls for these modifiers. It's way too easy, since both of these modifiers are basically the same thing, to get lost and think, oh, well, I must be looking at the twist when you're actually looking at the bend, and I'm sure that's all you were doing. No big deal, though. Okay, so back over here to our club carry empty. All I'm going to do is put this kind of low at the character's side, kind of snug. I'm going to go over to object data and scale this down a little bit. And that's it. It just needs to be right here next to our character. That's it, and that's all. Very, very, very simple. Okay, now we need a club swing system. We need a way to make this club swing. This is actually going to be a couple of different locators. Now, with my 3D cursor still at the center of the scene, and if it's not, if you've moved it, bumped it, or, randomly clicked and placed it somewhere, make sure you hit Shift-S and put that back at the center, which, again, should be at the base of your character. Let's add in a new empty. And we need to get this right at the center of our character, or somewhere nearby. It doesn't need to be super exact, but just understand this will end up being the center of the swing. It's kind of like the pivot point from which the swing will take place. So the closer it is to the center of the character, the better. So I'm just going to kind of manually put it toward the middle of the character. And as soon as it goes in there, you'll notice it gets kind of hard to select because the size of the axes. So all I'm going to do is take my display size and just kick it up a little bit. Now, if you would like to change the display type to something like a sphere or something, by all means, you can do that. I'm just going to leave mine at a standard cross, though. Plane axes is what that's called. Now, we need to name this. And we're going to name this, let's see, what are we, Club Swing. Club Swing. This will be the object that we actually rotate in order to make our character swing the ball. Or swing the club, thank you. Now, it's not the object that is going to, that our club is going to be attached to. That's going to be something else. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and create that. So with our club swing selected, I'm going to hit Shift-D, and I'm going to move this down the Y-axis. Basically move it forward, straight out in front of the character. And click to commit that. Now, I'm going to take my object data and shrink this new version down a ways, make it small. And we're going to name this Club Swing Constraint. This will be the object that controls where the club is going to go. Now, I want you to do something. It's not super fancy. Just remember this. We're going to take the z-axis and rotate so that the z-axis is pointing straight away from the character. Okay? And I don't think this is actually in the notes. So if you're writing things down, add this one in, right? So we'll rotate, middle mouse click to get us aligned with the z-axis and rotate that forward. And that's exactly the opposite direction of what I wanted. So I'm just going to take X and punch that into 90. Now, the reason we do that is that a second ago, you remember we put the local Z rotation for this guy pointing down. And with this guy pointing down too, that means the club is going to be pointed out forward, which is exactly what we want. We may still need to do a little bit of corrective rotation to make sure the club is oriented exactly the right way, but we'll deal with that a little later down the road. Okay. Now, the last thing, because we're almost there, we need to make sure we've got some parenting in place. We're going to take our club swing constraint empty, and we're going to parent it to club swing. So select the two, Control P, parent to object. Then take your club swing, parent that to the ball control. So after snapping this to the center, we move this forward. Yes, you have one object that is right at the center, so one empty, dead at the center. This is what we're going to use to actually swing the club. We duplicate that and move it straight forward. You can think of this kind of like the attachment point. This is where the club is going to be located. So if you follow me here, notice as I rotate the club swing, that little attachment point swings around too. And that's exactly what we're going to be utilizing to make our character swing the club around. So, once you have that, we're ready to move forward. So I want to give everybody just a minute. Double check your ready status. Make sure you're ready to move forward. And it looks like most folks are following along. You notice that we get multiples in here?
Yes, I've pointed that out to Nelson.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we're pretty much ready to roll. Now, at this point, we need to set up the constraints that will drive where our club is going to be located. So you need to select this little club locator that we have, the club root, and we're going to constrain this guy. So over in your properties editor, jump over to object constraints. The first thing we're going to add is a copy location. Could you show the parenting again? Yes, of course. It's pretty straightforward. Our club carry is parented to our ball control. In fact, I think I can show this right up in here pretty well. Or it should be. Did I ever parent that? Pretend that I parented this. There we go. So, yeah, club carry is parented to ball control. Club swing is also parented to ball control. And the club swing constraint is parented to club swing. All right. So we've got our constraint in place. We just need to give this constraint a target. And the first thing we're going to do is set the target to club carry. Now, as soon as we do this, you'll notice the club pops immediately into position. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. Now, we also want to be able to copy rotation. So with your club root still selected, go back over to Add Constraint and drop on a copy rotation. And once again, set your target to club carry. Nothing should change in this case because really there's nothing to change. Now at this point, if you want to create a more natural sort of carrying position and rotation for the club when it's being carried, it's a good time to grab your club carry empty, and now you can edit it a little bit. So you can maybe move it forward a little, maybe rotate it a little just to kind of bring it forward, like so. Because whatever you do to the club carry right now is going to translate over to the club root because of those constraints. All right. with everybody moving forward from here, a visual representation of the parents and empties and such would help those right-brained folk. Actually, you should have a great visual representation right up here in the outliner that shows you the parenting perfectly. Because you can see that we've got our ball control. You can see that the ball deformer empty is parented to that, so is the club carry, and so is the club swing. And you can see that the club swing constraint is parented in it like so. So you got a great hierarchy. Yeah, I can go over both the copy location. It's just one copy location and one copy rotation. So here's what I'll do, just to kind of make things a little easier on everybody. Let me grab the club root. And I'm actually going to nuke these. Now, I'm not going to make a habit of doing this, but these are fast enough to add that it doesn't make much of a difference. So, with club root selected, go to your constraints panel. You're going to add on copy location. And you can just go ahead and add on a copy rotation as well. In both cases, set the target to your club carry empty. That's it. Add them in, change your target. You're good to go. Miranda, she's so great. She said a visual representation of the parents would be, that would help all the right brain folks.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh yeah, it's actually been there the whole time.
I saw that. It's funny.
Yeah, well, the outliner's like that though. You do kind of forget it's there after a while. All right, so that's our first constraint. Very nice, easy. Everybody's happy right now. Now it's time for things to get a little interesting. I'm going to minimize these UIs, so take the copy location, copy rotation, minimize them both, make them all nice and small. We don't really need to mess with these anymore. Now, with my club root still selected, make sure you have that selected if you don't. The outliner is a great way to make sure that that's the thing that's selected. The reason I make such a big deal out of that is because right now the club carry and the club root occupy the same position in rotation, and it'd be real easy to mess that up. So, we're going to add on another copy location and another copy rotation. However, this time, we're going to take the target and set it over to the club swing constraint. Now, for those of you who are coming to this from other 3D applications, you're going to notice a pretty particular behavior here. Now, I'm speaking specifically to my Maya and Max people. There is kind of like a modifier stack behavior going on right now. The last constraint you add will take dominance over the first one. It's not like there's a perfect 50% blend or anything like that when you first add these in, as you would see in a program such as Maya. So what we're going to be doing in the end is just changing the influence of these second constraints. I want you to watch this really carefully. Notice my 2 second constraints here that are constraining me to the club swing constraint object. As I blend that influence down, you see what happens? We go back to our original position. When I say last, I mean bottom. So basically, what happens is we evaluate from top to bottom, and the thing on the bottom is going to take dominance over the thing at the top. In some applications, again, such as Maya, and you guys have to, cut me a little bit of slack for being a long-time Maya user. If you were to add 2 constraints on top of each other like this, what you get by default is a 50% blend. Maya will say, oh, well, you're constrained here and you're constrained here. I'll just average the difference between the two.
This is more like the way, layer opacity in Photoshop.
Yeah. Or again, very much like the modifier stack that we've already seen. One is going to take dominance over the other. But it's not additive by default, which that's a good point. Okay, now at this point, it's a good idea to double check and make sure that your club looks pretty much like this. You want it to be pointing straight out from the character, and you want the head of the club to be oriented such that he could hit a ball. What I mean when I say that is if your club swing constraint needs to be rotated a little bit, it's a good idea to do that. Now, in this case, I would only need to rotate it on Y, but like if your club is oriented like this or something weird, you want to spin that around so that it's facing dead forward. That's what you want to have happen right now. Now, there's a couple of other things we need to do to kind of wrap this up. We're going to take our club swing object, and we're going to rotate it down slightly. So grab rotate, So just tap R, and I'll use the middle mouse button to constrain to the x-axis, and I'm just going to tilt this down. It can go underneath the character a little bit, because you're probably going to be swinging from on top of a hill. And you will be able to edit this a little more. So if at some point you're like, the club needs to go up or down, you will be able to change this. So tilt that down a bit. And then here's the important part. And you can't forget this. It's in the notes because I really don't want you to forget it. And I'm making a big deal out of talking about it because I don't want you to forget it. Go over to your object panel and change your rotation mode. You want to make sure that you set this to something like ZYX. Here's why. If I take ZYX and here's why. We set this over to gimbal. And let me go ahead and bring up the rotation controller. What we want is for our rotation axes to be aimed down the club. So we get a nice natural arc to our swing. And if we change our rotation mode to something like ZYX, you notice everything updates. And now all we'll have to do as animators is just influence the rotate Z, or rotate Z, and we get a nice fluid arc to our swing. Now we did this in the animatics. I'm just so you've already seen this once before. I'm just kind of making a point because if you forget that, if you don't do that, your swing is going to look really weird, or you're going to do it by rotating 3 separate values individually. This allows you to just animate one object one property, and if you don't do that, rigging is going to be very tricky for you moving forward. Now I want everybody to double check their ready status at this point before we go any further, because we're about to do something a little bit fancy.
Are you about to move into drivers?
I am.
This might be a good time.
It's a good time for a break.
To go ahead and take a real 10-minute break so those that are catching up can go ahead and get caught up.
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and give everybody a 10-minute break. I'll pause the video now. Okay, we are back from our lunchy munch break. And we are now going to take a look at drivers inside of Blender. Now, drivers are kind of a special thing, and they actually get some special notes because of that. Drivers. Drivers are a way to handle reactive animation. Now, what do I mean when I say reactive animation? I mean one object does something, and in reaction, another object does something else. Earlier on, we were talking about keyframe animation. We made a little graph, like so. And we had some keyframes, and we had an animation curve in between those keyframes. But we did something that was pretty standard. We had value over time. And this is how most of your animation is going to be. However, when it comes to reactive animation, you still have keyframes. You still have animation curves. It's all the same thing, but instead of being driven by time, instead of it being value over time, it's value 1 over value 2. Now, if that blows your mind, if you're like, I don't get it, why would you ever do this? This is so that you can have one object's animation literally be driven by something else. So if you wanted to, you could have something that functioned kind of like a slider. So I'm going to draw the world's most amazing slider. And this could operate on some object. So as you move this slider up, maybe the ball moves up as well. And that's kind of how we're going to use this. We're going to create some custom properties that are going to drive certain parts of our character. Things like the bend, things like the squash and stretch, things like the swinging of the club, or even the position of our club going from its carrying position to its swinging position. We're going to drive all of that using special properties. It's going to make our lives a lot easier as animators, because right now, the real problem we have is we have too many things to select and try to control. If we wanted to animate our character doing squash and stretch, we've got to select the character, we've got to go over into his modifiers, we've got to make sure that we are, actually for squash and stretch, we're just scaling. So even right there, it's already easy to get confused. You just saw me do it. And then if we want to handle bending, we've got to make sure we're looking at the right modifier. It's too much. What we're going to do instead is take our ball control and make sure that its name now means something. We're going to give it some more controls. What I want you to do is select your ball control, and I'm going to close up everything in the objects panel for now. There's just too much stuff. At the very bottom, you'll see custom properties. So I want you to add some new properties. We'll just do this one at a time. So I'm going to click add. And as soon as you add, you want to edit this, okay? You're going to edit it only one time and never again. The first property's name is going to be bend. Property value, go ahead and set to 0, which will just be your default. Minimum value will be -100. Positive value will be +100. Or max value will be 100. Now, you can also add a tip to this, and these are pretty cool in case, you get confused easy, or in case maybe you're using this for somebody else. Maybe you're setting up a rig for somebody else to use. So you can say, this controls the bending of our ball character. When you're done, just click OK. Now, here's the great thing. Mouse over this, and you get a nice little handy tooltip. So you'll never get confused. Now, we're going to do this a few more times. We're going to add another one. Actually, I'm going to add 4 more. So I have a total of 5 properties. And let's just edit each one individually. So the second one down, we're going to name... we can name these anything we want. They will be placed in alphabetical order. Just to show that, I'm going to make the next one twist. And again, property value of 0. It's the same settings for everything, actually. So 0, -100 to 100. We'll just change this. And instead of bending... we'll set this to twisting, if I can do that. It's too far, so... This controls the twisting of our ball character. Click OK. And there you go. And it's not going to put these in alphabetical order, probably because I'm not adding them in that order. But that's okay. If you were to add them one at a time, they will jump around a little bit in order, which is okay. It doesn't matter what order they're in. Next, let's do club. And this will be carry/swing. And what this property will do is literally allow us to blend between the carrying position and the swinging position. Now, the way I'm going to handle this is the min value. I'm actually going to kind of diverge a little bit from my notes. You don't have to do this. No, okay. Now, let's just stay consistent. I was going to do just between 0 and 100, but we can do -100 just as well. It doesn't really change anything. But I didn't save my changes. That was terrible of me. So club, carry, swing, property value of 0. And this moves the club from carry position to swinging position. Like so. Click OK. See, there you go. Now let's take the next one and edit. And let's see, the next one's going to be squash stretch. And value 0. This controls squash and stretch of our ball character. Click OK. And finally, the last one, edit. And this will be swing club. 0. And there you go. So now we have all 5 of our properties set up and ready to go. Now comes the point where we set up our driver. So this is where things get a little bit fancy, and rather than stop what we're doing and actually set one of these up that doesn't mean anything, just as an example, we're just going to go ahead and put together the ones that we need, and you'll see the process in this way. If you get stuck, please remember that I've got these notes, which at this point I did try to make the notes nicely detailed, but if this is the first time you've seen this, pay close attention. So on the ball control, we're going to start with the bend property, and I'm just going to right-click this and choose Add Driver. It's going to turn the field purple. That just lets you know that, actually, woohoo, that's a mistake. We're not actually adding the driver there. I was just kidding, guys. Don't mind me. So, boom. Oh my goodness. I hit Control-Z, and I think it actually got rid of all my properties. That's horrible. Okay, well. You know what? Actually, just to save video time, I'm going to pause the video and recreate all of those properties. Be right back. Zooming now. Okay, we're back. I just reestablished all 5 of those properties so that they all look nice and are back to where they should be with the appropriate values we had just a second ago. Now, what we actually wanted to do here, a second ago, I right-clicked and I chose Add Driver, and that was a mistake. We didn't want to do that. What we want to do is copy the data path, because we're going to be using this as a driver. We're not going to be driving this. This is going to be the thing that does the moving. So right-click and copy that data path. What that's going to do is grab the name of this property so that we can apply it later as the actual driver that we're going to utilize. So it says, next we're going to do is select the ball character and find that bend modifier. So grab him, please, please, please double check, make sure you have the bend modifier and not the twisting one. So if you mess that up, all kinds of craziness will happen. We're going to right click on factor, and under factor we'll add a driver. And so that turns purple. That purple color is just letting you know that this property is being driven by something. Now here's the trick. We need a graph editor. So I'm going to split my view in half, like so. And we'll take this lower one and change this over to a graph editor. Now here's the deal. We've already looked at a graph editor previously. We had to for Animatics. But this editor actually comes in 2 different modes. You can have an F-curve editor, which is for your function curves. If you've never heard the term F-curve, it means function curve. It's the same as an animation curve, interpolation curve, keyframe curve. They have all kinds of names. They all mean the same thing. It's just the curves that are created by your keyframes as the computer interpolates between them. We're going to click on this and change the mode over to drivers. If you don't do this, if you forget to change the mode of your graph editor over to drivers, you'll be pretty confused for the next few minutes, so please make sure that you do that. Next, some interesting things now happen. We can select this factor, and you can see there's the property that we are driving. But there's some more information here that we need. And if you hit the the N key, I always mess those up because I spend so much time up here in the view. The N key is going to open up this panel on the right-hand side. You also have this little plus button you can click, and that'll bring it up as well. We have some settings here we need to adjust. First off, we have a variable that's already in place. I want you to click X and delete that. We also have a modifier. Now, a modifier is a way to change the animation relationship in a variety of different ways. What we're going to do is just close that out as well. I don't want a modifier, and right now I don't want a variable. We're going to add one of our very own. This gets rid of any animation curve that you had. Now, once we've done that, we need to create a brand new variable, okay? So we're going to click on Add Variable, and go ahead and name this. We're going to call this var bend. That's just to help us identify this later if we're just kind of looking at it. It can be set to single property. You want to take your object, I'm going to try to give myself a little more screen space here, at least temporarily. Take the object and set this over to ball control. Now, as soon as you do that, a path property is going to appear. Now, earlier, we copied the data path to this property into our clipboard. So now if we just hit Control-V and paste, you get this. If you get anything else, if you don't get, quote, bend in brackets, then you need to make sure that you go all the way back to your ball control object, right-click on bend, and copy that data path. Then if you go back over to the character himself, it'll take you right back here and just make sure you paste that in. You've got to have a reference to that particular property or this isn't going to work. All right, so we have a variable in place. We have the property established. We need to change a couple of things, though. We're going to take the type for this driver, and we're going to change this to an averaged value. Now, you have some different options here. Something that Blender does by default, which is very handy, is you can have multiple drivers affecting the same thing, which is something we're not going to do, but if you want to play with it later, you can. And you can use this type to really kind of hone that down. You can set it to a max, to a min, to a sum, or an average value. We're just going to choose average value. So we'll keep things nice and easy since we're only going to be driving with one thing anyway. Though, just in case you're wondering, sum will work exactly the same way. So will min and max, because we only have, again, one driver. So now we need to create this relationship. And earlier on, back in Photoshop, if I jump us back over here, I told you that this relationship is going to be defined between a graph from value 1 and value 2. So what we're going to do literally is we're going to have the bend deformer value. And instead of time over here, we're going to have the bend property. That's how this is going to work. What did you do just then? Set dependency type to average value. Yes, that's correct. As a matter of fact, if I jump back over to Blender, you can see that. So under drivers, you'll see type. Make sure you set that to average value. And you can click update dependencies, but it's not going to do much for you at the moment. Okay, so now we need to define that relationship by dropping down some keyframes. This is a pretty easy process. I'm not going to leave you a lot of room for interpretation here in this example. However, if you would like to change things around and make your own variations of the various keys I'm going to drop here, by all means do that. So I'm going to hold down Control and just click right here in the graph editor. That's a left click, by the way. And if I right click, I can move our cursor out of where you see I just placed one tiny little keyframe. Now with that key selected, if you come over to Active Keyframe, just go ahead and set that over to Linear. When I am creating driver relationships, 99 times out of 100, I want a linear relationship between the two. Just because if I want to do any sort of ease in or ease out, I will handle that in the object that I'm actually animating. I don't want the relationship itself to have that behavior, though, because then I could end up fighting myself, if that makes any sense. And if it doesn't, that's cool. Just something you'll work with and you'll get the hang of it. I know this is a stupid question, but could you tell me the shortcut key to snap a 3D cursor to the bottom, top, center of an object? My center of origin has always been at the center of the object. Well, what I usually do, you can hit Control-Alt-Shift-C and you can move the origin to the location of the 3D cursor. So your next thing is going to be, you'll start off with this actually. You'll hit Shift-S and you can move the cursor to a selected object and then just kind of update it from there. So if you moved it to selected, like so, now I've already got my origin at the bottom, but let's say maybe that puts your 3D cursor, let's just say, I don't know, somewhere right about here by default. I mean, you can always update that manually by punching in exactly the right values you need. Just get that 3D cursor exactly where you want the origin to be, and then hit Control-Alt-Shift-C and set the origin to the 3D cursor, and that should solve your problem. And I think that's all the questions we have right now. Okay, so we have our first keyframe in place. Set that to linear. We don't want to deal with handles right now. As I mentioned, I like my internal relationships to all be linear. And we're going to change the values for it. So take the key and set its time to 0, or its frame, excuse me. So frame to 0, and set its value to 0 as well. And that's just going to completely center that up. Now with that done, select your key and just hit Control-C. Just an easier way to handle what we're about to do. So you just copy that keyframe. I'm going to right-click my mouse. Really, it doesn't matter where it goes, but if you put it someplace close to 100 along the bottom, things will be a little easier for you. Anywhere on the right-hand side of the curve will do, though. So somewhere over here on the right, right-click to move your cursor. Then hit Paste, Control-V. If you right-click to move your cursor again, you'll see you did just get a brand new keyframe. So if you select that keyframe, you can now change its frame to 100. And I don't really expect you to know what your value is going to be right off the top of your head. So how do you test? How do you know that you've got the appropriate value in here? Well, you're probably just going to have to check it out manually. So you could take your factor and update that. You might have to do some tests in advance. Now, I didn't actually do that. So if you were confused, like if you didn't know how far something would need to bend, you'd probably need to break this and just run a quick test. What I'm going to do, though, you can also test it here. If you just take your value, you can move it around. So I'm just going to grab a random value. Let's just kind of slide this up. And I'm doing that just by dragging my left mouse button. You can also, if you want to, it's just like in the viewport, you can hit the G key and you can move this around. So pick a value, but make sure your frame stays at 100, right? Or somewhere nearby. Let me just go ahead and manually set that back over to 100. Then if I grab my ball control, watch this. I can take my bend and increase it, and wow, that's horrible is what that is. But he's bending a little too far. But that's how we can test this. So if I go back over to my character now, and we start to update this key, all we have to do is slide its value down until we find the maximum amount of bend we want when our slider is at 100. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm kind of looking for yeses or nos or questions if there are any. And I'm not seeing anybody jumping in. Again, the whole idea here is you're just defining a graph that makes the relationship work. So in this case, you know, a bend of about 1 is working really well for us. So that's what we'll do. Now we can place our cursor on the left side of the curve and just paste again. Doesn't really matter where it goes because we can set the numbers manually at this stage. We can say the frame will be negative 100 and the value will just be the opposite of what we set before. So we'll make it negative 1. Yes, before you asked, at this point you could technically delete out this keyframe in the middle. Let's see, somebody says, I keep looking for the timeline, but see the frames in the box. I do not know what you mean. If you have a question, please make sure questions go over in the webinar system. Okay. Yeah, and it says in the notes I have a value of 1.156. That's just what I had when I created this before. Your mileage may vary as it varies here. It's just one of those things. Now, if we go back to the ball control, we should be able to completely test out our bend. And all of that should be working wonderfully. Okay. Annie just said, you kept referring to what frame you were on, and I finally saw it in the active keyframe. Yep. So just make sure you have that keyframe selected. Okay, so everything is working. Yes, you can make your ball like totally headbang to music right now, and that works great. So now it's time to set up some of the other controls as well. Now, I only have official notes for the bend driver, but really all we're going to be doing is the same thing over and over again. The only thing we're going to do that's a little fancy is this guy. And by this guy, I mean the club root, because the club root is going to have its constraints being driven. We're going to drive these influence values. And you have to make sure you drive the right ones. We're going to control the copy location and copy rotation for the second set, the set that is on the bottom of the list. Make sure you keep that in mind, because if you mess that up, then things won't work properly. You could fix it, though, potentially. You could just reverse the order that the constraints are listed, and that would solve your problem. So if you break something, that's one way you can go about fixing it. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Let's just start off with copy location to keep things nice and simple. We're going to right-click and add a driver. Now, over here in my window, same thing as before. I'll just go ahead and take the type and change it first to average value. If you get a little error, don't worry about it. We haven't actually set up any targets yet, so of course that's going to be a problem. So now I'll destroy out the variable that I have and the generator. You don't have to do that. You could just as easily use the variable that's there, but if you're just getting started, I think it's good practice. So we'll add in a variable, and we'll call this var club carry swing. We need to give this the appropriate object, which of course is going to be the ball control. And then we need that property value, so we're going to grab the ball control, jump over to its object properties, right-click on club carry swing, and once again, copy that data path. We need that. Go over to the object. Actually, I'm sorry. We want to make sure that we're on that club carry swing constraint. No, I'm sorry, the club root. Thank you, Zach. Welcome back to the party. All right, now we can take that path and just paste in our value. So just Control-V, and there we go. At this point, if you click Update Dependencies, that error will go away if it's still bugging you. But now we need to set up our relationship. So what I'm going to do is hold down Control and just click over here in the graph, and that's going to drop down some random keyframe. And I'm going to make sure the interpolation type for that is, again, set to linear. We'll take the frame and set it to 0, take the value and set it to 0. Now, here's how this is going to work. We want our slider to exhibit the following behavior. At a value of -100, which, yeah, you could probably make all kinds of commentary on whether it's a good idea to use a value of -100 and whether that's intuitive, but I just did that for consistency. At a value of -100, our character should be carrying the club. At a value of +100, he should be getting ready to swing the club. So that's how the positions are going to work. So go ahead and set this to -100. Come back over to the club root. And let's just copy off this keyframe. So I'll just select it, hit Control-C, and I'll just paste this over here on the left side of the curve. It doesn't really matter where it goes. We'll take the frame and set that to -100, but what do we need the value to be? Well, if we double check over on the club root, we can test an influence of 0 means we should go all the way back to our carry location, that's exactly what's happening. So that's what we want. We want this to have a value of 0 at -100. Now, see, somebody just has a question. Said, what was the command to add a key again? Just Control-click over here in space, and that will add your first keyframe. Then we're just copying and pasting after that. Okay, next we need another key over here on the opposite side. So I'm just going to hit Control-V because I've already copied it once before. And we're going to change our frame to 100. And our value just simply needs to be 1. Now, this does make our little central keyframe a little problematic at this point. So you could, obviously, can anybody just want to tell me real quick what we could set the value of it to? We can also delete it, I know that. But what could we set the value to? Anybody? 0.5, very good. So yeah, folks are following along. No, I mean, the easiest thing, of course, would just be to delete it. But somebody in BuzzNet did say you could set it to 0.5, which is correct. But just select it, hit X or the delete key, and delete that keyframe, and you have a nice relationship now. And it's a good time to test this. So we go over to our ball control, and whoop, we go from carrying to swinging, like so. And yes, I realize going from -100 to +100 is a bit lengthy for this process. But again, it did make it really easy for everybody to set up your controls exactly the same way. Now, for those of you who are thinking, well, is it a problem that the club kind of passes right through the character? In our case, no, we're not going to stress that. Though if that was really bothering you, remember that the club itself is still a separate object that's just been parented in. You could, at the end of the day, add a little bit of corrective animation to this. So you could just keyframe its actual position when it's in the carry position, keyframe it again when it's in the swinging position, and then right in the middle you could tug it forward just a little so it seems to wrap around the character. You have all kinds of little corrective abilities like that. Okay, so there's the first constraint already set up. And now it's time for us to set up the next one. So go back to the club root. And we need to go into its constraints. We're going to right-click on the influence for its copy rotation. And same as before, we'll add a driver. And moving a little bit faster, I'll go ahead and make sure we select this. Now, in this case, things are going to get a little interesting because you have two separate curves that are visible. If you don't want to accidentally bump or change this relationship at all, you can lock it, which means we can't really do anything with it. Or if you just want it completely out of your way, turn off visibility by clicking on the little eye. And now you can just focus on what's here and what's important. I'm going to scroll down and destroy out its modifier. We're going to take the type and set it to average value. Take the variable and set this to var. I don't think I named the last one. I'll have to double check that. So this will be var rotation constraint. Actually, what would I call this? Yeah, let's just do rotation. Rotation. If you caught on that the name isn't really all that critical because we're never going to see it again, you're right. Let's take the object and set it to ball control. And it says it's looking for transform channel. We want to make sure that's set to single property, which is something else that comes in by default when you delete and just add your own variable. Now, once again, we need that path. So I'm going to go over to ball control, go into its properties, right click and grab club carry swing, copy its data path. Over on the club root, we'll just select this and paste, Control V. Now we're ready for our keyframes. So I'm just going to Control, click over here in space. That creates our first one. We'll set its interpolation type to linear. Now let's just keep this simple. Frame will be -100. Value will be 0. We'll select that keyframe and copy it, and just paste it somewhere over here. Select this new keyframe, set its frame to 100, take its value, set it to 1. Now we should be able to test out the relationship, so let's go back over to ball control. So right now he's carrying, and looks like he's actually not rotating that into swinging position, so we need to make sure that that actually took. Let's go over to the club root, and let's see here. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you, Gav.
No, I'm not sure whether I'm. I may just be confusing the issue.
Well, let me see what's going on here.
When you selected your influence, you selected club swing thing again?
Did I?
The data path.
Oh, well, that would do it. But
I wasn't sure whether you'd done the same one twice or not. That's all.
Well, you should actually, because the same thing should be driving it. But let me just double check and make sure that that we're being influenced by the proper thing. So let's make sure we have the rotation selected and double check our dependencies. Average value. Let's just try updating my dependencies. That's all I needed to do. Let's just click my update button. And really, that's kind of irritating to me that Blender isn't updating that automatically. But, you know. So now let's double check our property. And we go from carrying position to swinging position. That's exactly what we need to see right there. And let's see. And those of you who are saying this should be plus minus 240, actually that's not what we're driving right now. We're just still setting up the carry and swing, which is two separate properties being driven by the same slider. One property for the copy location constraint, and one for the copy rotation constraint. All right. So
yeah, I was wrong.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is squash and stretch. This one's a little interesting. Anybody remember how we're handling squash and stretch anyway?
Yes.
Yes, we're doing it by way of a scale constraint. So we need to drive our scale. So I'm going to jump over here into my object, expand out our transforms, and we need to drive. Well, let's make sure we get the right one, too. So it's a good idea to test. Let's hit Control Space to show my manipulator, and we'll go to the Scale tool, and make sure we set this over to Local. So we're going to be doing Scale Y. So we'll just right-click. And you don't want to say Add Drivers, because what that's going to do is drive Scale X, Y, and Z. You want to add a single driver for just that property. Now, if we take a look, our drivers are starting to stack up over here on our character. So I'm going to take the factor from my simple deformer and just kill that off. I'm just going to hide off its visibility, so I don't even see it. It's completely out of the way. As before, I'm going to need to get rid of my variable and my modifier. Of course, as before, I could keep the variable if I wanted to and just reuse it, but I'm not going to. I'll set the type over to average value. And all kinds of crazy things start to happen right now. Don't let that alarm you. We just haven't set up the relationship yet.
The most awesome golfer ever.
I know. He just got run over by something. Steamroller. So we'll add a variable, and we'll call this var squash stretch. And we'll set the object over to ball control. And we need to get that value. So let's go over to our object properties. Right-click, and copy data path. And I'm just going to paste this in. So there's squash stretch, and let's update the dependencies. Now it's still going to be squash because we don't have a relationship defined. So I'm just going to control click here inside the view and add my first keyframe, set its interpolation type to linear, frame of 0, and value, because its scale, will be 1. And let's just update that again. And he snaps back to some nice size. Now, let's go over to our object squash stretch, and let's just go ahead and drag this all the way up to 100. Go back over to the character, and let's copy our keyframe and paste it. And we'll take our frame and set that to 100. And let's take our value, and something actually happened that shouldn't have happened, and it looks like Blender might... Okay, it's not being stupid. For a second I thought it was, though. Let's see, it got
keyframe at 0,
yeah.
But you had the other keyframe selected that you just pasted.
Yeah, I hit a weird key or something, but just make sure that first key at 0 stays at a value of 1 and doesn't move around. So make sure I have this selected. We'll take our frame and set this to 100, and let's set our value. Let's just try something like 2, and we'll update that. So that's a bit extreme. We probably don't need that much scaling. So let's try something. In my notes, I should have a value in here. So 0.6 and 2. Well, it says I'm using 2, but 2 just seems a little bit much. Now, here's the great thing about this. All you're doing is setting up a relationship for some sliders to work. Nobody says you've got to take your slider and cram it all the way up to 100. So even if your relationship defines you going over the top, that can actually be a good thing and can help you out later down the road. Because nobody says you have to animate that going all the way up to 100. So we could just go ahead and leave this at 2. That'll be fine. All right, and now let's jump over here to the opposite side, and we'll paste. So at frame -100, we're going to have a value not of 0. We can't scale him down to 0. We're going to set this to, let's see, 0.6, I believe. And now it's a good idea to double check that. And that's a little extreme, but again, as before, nobody says you've got to animate that going down all the way. I think I kind of want to pull those down a little bit, but I'll restrict myself. I'll be good. All right, so that handles our squash and stretch. We now need to handle the swinging of the club. And somebody said, so this is rigging. Yes, right now we are just rigging. We are not animating at all. We're just setting up a way to more easily animate later so that when it comes time to animate the character, we just have some sliders to play with. We don't have to go looking for bits and pieces all over the place. All right, so let's see. I thought the Banana Man project was for the fundamentals. It is, as far as I know.
Yeah.
It's because you were stretched out and it looked like a banana.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. Right on the nose. Thank you for the save, Gavin. I don't look silly at all. Let's see. Where was I? I am doing the next thing, which is the club swing. Fantastic. So, same as before, we need to rotate this. And remember, we set this up so that all we have to do is rotate just the Z-axis. So I'm going to right-click on rotation and add a single driver again. We don't want to put add drivers because that'll give us a driver for each one of the axes, which is overkill. And we will kill off the variable. We'll kill off the generator. We'll set the type over to average value. And let's add in a variable. So this will be var club swing. Set the object over to ball control. And we got to go get that path. So select the object, or the ball control. Right-click on swing club. Copy data path. Back over to our club swing and paste. Now, in this case, I've already got some numbers set up, so we'll be animating this going between negative 240 and positive 240, which makes things pretty easy to do. We can just hold down Control and click somewhere in space to add in a keyframe. Let's go ahead and set its interpolation over to linear. Frame negative 100. And you can set this up, but you will want to double check to make sure he's swinging in the right direction. Let me show you what I mean. If we set this to negative 240, you would want to make sure that that would be actually the backswing and not the forward swing. But that's okay. We'll test that out here in just a minute. Also, if you can't see your curve, make sure you hit the home key so that you can see everything. We'll grab this key, Control-C, jump over here, and let's see, let's move this over. That's interesting. It's not letting me move my cursor over any further, but that's okay. Let me just see if I can paste that. It's putting them all in the same location, and I don't much care for that. I see what Blender's all about right now. Oh, I think it's because I'm zoomed in so close. That's what it is. Blender doesn't much care for the concept of sub-keys and sub-frames, so it gets a little snappy once you start zooming in really, really far. So definitely be careful of that. So I'll go ahead and paste in my next keyframe, and we'll select that. And we'll just go to positive 100 and a value of 240. And now if we home on everything, so just hit the home key in here, we can see the entire curve. Again, good idea to test at this point. What we want to have happen is when we go negative, we should swing back. And just to test things out even further, we can take our club carry and move it over here. And it looks like we're getting exactly the behavior we want. But if for some reason you were setting something similar up on your own, it's possible that rotation could be reversed, meaning that if you use the same values that I did, it's possible that going negative might actually swing the club forward. You just want to be aware of that and reverse your relationship. All right, so go ahead and set that back over to 0. And that only leaves us one more thing, which is going to be our twist. So let's go back over to our character one last time and go over to its modifiers. And here is our twist. We'll take that factor, right click, and add a driver. Let's go ahead and save ourselves a little bit of time. We'll go ahead and grab our ball control, right click on twist, and go ahead and copy that data path. Now we'll turn off the visibility of everything else. Let's go ahead and kill out the variable, and we'll kill out the generator if there is one. And I might have just done that to the wrong... Yep, I did do that to the wrong object. So make sure you have the proper factor selected before you do that. So I had to undo just then. So we'll hide this guy out. Kill out the variable. Kill out the generator. Add in a brand new variable. And this will be for var twist. Or taste. Single property. Looks good. Ball control. And we can just paste in that path because we went ahead and copied it just a second ago. Now, I have some values for you in the notes. This says we've got us twisting between positive and negative 0.542. That may or may not work well, but we'll go ahead and give it a shot anyway. So I'll go ahead and drop down a keyframe. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and select that, hit Control-C, right-click, and just paste again. And that'll just give me 2 different keyframes. I'm doing all the work just kind of all together. I'll grab both of those. And earlier, you saw me select the keys and change their interpolation mode over here. You can also do this by tapping the T key. So we'll just set those over to linear, like so. The first one, we'll set to negative 100, and a value of let's just say 0.55. We'll round it a little bit. And this one we'll set to positive 100, and a value of 0.55. So did I say negative 0.55 over there? No, it seems to be negative 0.55. And we'll go ahead and hit home so you can see the relationship a little more cleanly. Now, let's test things out. And my mouse is being stupid. Where did my character go? Come back. Thank you. And let's see, my twisting probably just needs to be updated. Let's just double check. Yep, see the type is set to scripted expression. Make sure that's set to average value. And it looks like that's going to work fine. So now there's full twisting, and there's twisting back the other way. I'm still getting, like, the bottom of his eyes getting pulled along here, and to fix that, I'll go into his actual modifier, and we'll take that upper limit and just pull it down a little bit further. That way his eyes aren't kind of stretching out the way they were a second ago. Okay. So we have all of our drivers set up at this point. We can twist our guy. We can make him swing his club around. We can make him move the club from a carrying position to a swinging position. We can squash and stretch him. And we can bend him. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause the video. And now we're back, and everybody should be caught up to this point. The last thing we need to do is hide out anything we don't want an animator or us, to select, bump, nudge, break, destroy, delete. So just kind of one thing at a time here. Let's start off with the things we know that we don't ever want to see. So we have like the club carry locator. We don't need that. Let's hide it. We'll also make it unselectable. We have the club swing. We don't need that either. We have a slider that will control that. So we can take the club swing, hide it, make it unselectable. Let's see, we have the club swing constraint. Obviously, we never touch that. We don't need it. The club root, we don't really need that either. We can just make that go away. The only thing we really need access to is just that ball control. So we can just hide out everything but that, and we end up with something that is nicely cleaned up. Now, it looks like I may have something else in there that is still selectable, or I could be crazy. It could just be the way the stuff is drawing, but I'll just kind of double check. No, it looks like that's about it. I have that ball deformer empty that's already hidden. So yeah, this is all we need, just this ball control. So at this point, we are ready to start the animation process, and here's the cool thing. Animation is now going to be very easy. Now, somebody said, no modifiers, etc., but still no new key. All right, so Heinrich is having a hard time adding keys. If you are miserably stuck trying to add keys, you should be able to also add those through the menu if you really, really need to. You can just hit I to insert a keyframe, so try that if nothing else is working. And someone said, what's the shortcut to change between scale, translate, and rotate? You mean like the tools here in the view? I always just click these. If you're looking for actual buttons to press, in the Maya button set, I know there's some buttons for it. I don't know if there are in Blender by default, and if they are, I don't know what they are. Because honestly, ever since I started using Blender, I almost never use those manipulators anymore. I basically keep them hidden with Control Space all the time. All right, so now let's go ahead and get started with the animation. Now, to do this, again, I'm going to be doing I'm reanimating, so to speak. If you have your animatics and you want to kind of trace the animation that way and put the character in the same location each time, that's totally cool. I'm not going to be doing that. Let's go ahead and hit G, and I'm going to slide this guy back to the edge of the grid. Now, I need to make a new hill one more time, so if you guys will bear with me for just a moment. I'm also going to put away our graph editor down here. We don't need it at the moment. I'll probably bring it back along with a timeline here in just a second. Kind of open up our view a little bit, and we don't really need all of these lights, but that's okay. I'll kill those later. So Shift-A, add a plane. We need to scale the plane, and we'll just do that 8, like so. Hit Tab, Control-Tab, F, make sure we have faces. W, subdivide, and let's see, we could hit F6. I think I did something like 21 times in all or something kind of like that. 21, 20, something. But the odd number does mean I have a nice point in the middle that I can select. So we'll switch over to vertices, grab this one vertex in the middle, and I'll just hit G. So I still have faces. Let's not do that. Control, Tab, V.
Apparently there's a hill in a hidden layer, according to somebody.
I don't think so in this file.
No, I don't.
But just because I don't have it in this particular example file. Anyway, let's hit G, and we'll move this up, and let's say 3.5, I believe was the magic number I gave everybody. And we'll hit F6, and we'll turn on proportional editing, and just increase that proportional size, and we have Insta-Hill. Get out of here, hit the T key, smooth that out, and we're pretty much all set. Though I do kind of want to clean up some of these light positions, because when you have lights really close to the ground like that, it looks terrible. Okay, so now we've got our hill, and we are ready to animate. Now everybody hopefully remembers how we animated this last time. If you don't, that's okay. We're going to do the whole thing again anyhow. We need a timeline, though, and generally I like the timeline to run all the way across the bottom of the interface. So let's see, there's a couple of different ways I can handle this. The manual way would be to completely obliterate my interface and then split the entire lower section. Set this over to a timeline, then split this back over, make this guy into a properties editor, split him, and make this into an outliner. And it's just so great that the interface is that flexible to just quickly knock that out. Now, the last time we animated, what we had was basically 30 frames of doing nothing. So we need to do a couple of things here. We need some key sets. If you guys remember key sets from our very first lesson, keyframe sets are a way that you can control what it is you are animating at any given moment. So let's go ahead and create a brand new one of those. And I'm going to name this keying set ball character. And we need to add some things into it. So let's go over to our ball control. Now, what all do we need to add? We are not going to be rotating our ball control. I mean, though you could. We certainly won't be scaling it, but let's just right-click over here on location, and we're going to add all to keying set. And that should put all of those in there. Now, if you want to double-check that, we can go back over to our scene properties, and under ball character, we take a look. You can already see location has just popped up inside for the ball control. But of course, that's not all we need. We need to go back over to the object properties, go down under custom properties, and we need to add each one of these as well. Now, you could potentially add these to a separate keying set if you really wanted to. But I'm going to try to keep things, just for the sake of the lesson, very, very simple. All right, so now it's time for us to actually begin the animating process. Now, I'm going to turn on auto keyframe. So automatic keyframe insertion for objects and bones, we'll turn that on. Automatic keyframe insertion using active keying set only, that's also good. And then we can change our keying set. Now, we did just set that up for the ball character. But because I don't want any keying to take place on any of my custom properties at the moment, I'm just going to go ahead and set this to location. Yes, I realize we could have just done this in the first place. It's just good form, good habit to get into to set up your key sets. Now, I'm going to assume this is a pretty good position for getting things started. Also, probably be a good idea to get our camera set up. Now, again, if you had your animatics in place, you've already got something already probably established for your shot. So I'm just going to kind of make one up real quick. That looks pretty good. We'll go with that for now. And for our first 30 frames, we're not going to be doing much of anything. So we need to go ahead and just kind of drop down that initial keyframe. So let's go ahead and click key there. Now, as you guys probably recall, the way we're going to handle this is kind of layering everything one action at a time. So the first activity we're going to do is basically just climb the character up to the top of the hill. So 30, 60, that's our first jump. 60 to 90, that's our next jump. And 90 to 120, that puts us up at the top of the hill. So I'll move him forward, and then I'll move him up. Well, I'll try to anyway. Click. Hello.
I need a better camera angle for that to work. All right, that's it. There we go. So we have our initial animation of him just kind of floating right up to the top of the hill. Now, I need a graph editor. So I'll split my scene up. Go ahead and switch this over to a graph editor. And there we go. Now, I want my initial keys to be linear. I don't want this ease in, ease out kind of stuff going on. So with all these keys selected, I'm just going to hit the T key and set those straight over to linear. Now, I'll move my timeline over to frame 60. And I'm just going to set the character pretty much just down on top of the hill. And at 90, set him on top of the hill again. In the middle of each set, and this is basically just like our keys that we did for our animatics. It's just good practice to run through one more time. We'll pull him up into the air to about the height we want him to jump. And like so. Now, of course, this jump is not going to look very good at the moment. We've got kind of this straight up and down thing going on. Let me hit Alt-Z, and hopefully that'll speed my view up a little bit so that if I want to, we should be able to play back through with Alt-A. Now, what's my playback currently set to? All right, yeah, we'll leave it kind of running like this for now. Okay, now we need to smooth out our jump a little bit, of course. So I'm going to take my 3 peak keyframes. I'm going to hit T and change their interpolation over to Beige. Actually, I'm going to need to do this for the bottom ones as well. And that will give us some handles. And make sure that these guys get switched over all the way so that he's got both of his handles. Now that's interesting. Let me expand this out. I'm going to expand location, and I'm going to hide out X location because it's just getting in my way anyway. And let's see. I'm not sure why this guy's only getting suddenly just one handle. Ah, there we go. Somehow this guy wasn't actually getting set over to Beige. I probably just had another key sitting on top of him that I had selected. Okay, so now take all of your bottom keys as before. And we're going to hit V and change their keyframe handle type over to free. That allows us to move the handles independently. And we're just going to make some nice points on the bottom. All right. Now, you can play with your keyframes here and get these to a nice sort of floating arc. But one of the tricks that we used in the setup of the animatics that is really, really handy is just get rid of these keyframes altogether and simply use the curve handles on either side of each keyframe to get your altitude back in. So that's actually what I want to do here. I'm going to hit Shift-S and move the cursor to the selected object. Then I'll hit Shift-A and add in an empty, which I will be getting rid of here very shortly. To kind of make sure that it stays out of my way, though, let's go ahead and take its size and I'll pull it down a little bit. And that way I can still select my original object. So now I can take this keyframe here in the middle. We can delete that. And now you might have to bump the timeline to get him to fly back down. Just keep that in mind. Now all we really need to do is adjust our handles to lift him back up into the air. And remember, it's kind of a tug of war. Adjust the left, then adjust the right, then adjust the left, then adjust the right, and so on. And I'll hit Z to go into wireframe view. Did I miss that? Oh no, it's still there. Haha. I knew it was around there someplace. So there we go. Kind of a nice smooth arc. It doesn't have to sit exactly on that original position, but somewhere close to it will probably be good. And now let's go up to the next one. So we'll get right up here to the peak. And we could do this. We could just say Shift S, cursor to selected, grab U, Shift S, and selected to cursor. And just snap him over there too. So that's handy. Go back, delete out our keyframe, bump the timeline once again. And again, just kind of that tug of war. A little on one side, a little on the other side. And somebody said, have those lines always been appearing, or did you enable a setting to make them appear? I'm not sure which lines. There's a whole lot of lines on my screen right now. I'll be honest with you. And that looks pretty good. So move on to the next one. And Shift S, cursor to selected, grab U, Shift S, selection to cursor. Go back, nuke out the keyframe, and kind of overdid that one just so I could see my little empty, my locator. All right, and so now we've got 3 very nice looking bounces going all the way back up. That is our bounce. That gets us up to the top of the hill. Now it's time for us to start adding our secondary animation. Now before you leave here, it's generally not a bad idea to clean out any keyframes that you create and don't need along the way. So we can take all of these keys for translate Y. So in between the top and the bottom, you don't want to delete the first one or the last one. Obviously, those are giving you your motion there, but these little middle ones here aren't adding anything. You'd have the same line whether those were there or not. So go ahead and just nuke those out. It'll just keep things nice and neat. You can do the same thing with location X. We're never really moving X. So you could take all of these keys and just delete them all together. And you'll notice that makes X disappear, which is just going to make your graph editor a little cleaner anyway. However, if you were doing something on your own, I'm just going to throw this out there, where you were having him kind of bounce to the left and right as he goes up the hill, of course you would want to use X in that case. All right. So, an old question. It was the lines that appeared when you were translating the character early on. No, those are there by default as far as I know. Okay, so now that we've got that in, it's time for our secondary animation. So it's time. We're going to begin this with our squashing and stretching. So with my ball control selected, we'll just start here. Now we need to go ahead and zero everything else out before we really start animating. And set the club carry swing. Well, actually that needs to stay at -100 for now. So that all stays put. And let's see what else. Set the twist back over to 0. Okay, everything is all nice and zeroed out. Let's go all the way back to frame 30. And what we're going to do is start off right at frame 30 with our character stretched out a little bit. Actually, squashed down as I read my notes backwards, which is great. So starting at the very beginning of his jump, we're going to squash him down. Let's go ahead and just drag this. I think in my notes I say something like about 36, which in this case is looking pretty good. There's, like everything, you know, your mileage may vary, and in between my 2 files it's actually varying a little bit too. It all depends on that relationship. So I'm actually going to use a value of around -22 in this case. It just looks nicer. The 36 is what I had in my test scene for anybody who was curious, and you're looking at the notes. Now, just a few frames later, so we're only going to go up to about frame 34. We want to stretch our character out. So he's just got off the ground, and we just want to stretch him. Numbers here don't really matter that much. You're just kind of taking these sliders and finding an intuitive value that makes him look like he's stretched. So don't get yourself too hung up on exactly what values I'm using at this point. Now, when he makes it back to 60, we're going to squash him back down again. So right as he lands, squash him down. Jump forward about 4 frames. Stretch him back up. And it looks like I actually never set a keyframe there, so that's my embarrassment. So let me make sure. I'm going to take my key set, and we'll set that to ball character. And I'll set my first keyframe. And I just want to check something real quick. I want to know if Blender's going to do this, because let's see. If I bump this value, is everybody going to get keyed? Because if it is, I'm about to go change my keying set just a little bit. So we'll stretch this up. And no, good. I just wanted to verify that he's not going to be adding in any keyframes where we don't need them. So we'll stretch him up. And I knew it shouldn't, but I mean, sometimes when you use a whole bunch of different applications, it's hard to remember which ones behave in what way. All right, and 64, we'll stretch him up. And we could go ahead and just take a look at that squash stretch curve as it gets created. And I'll hide out everything else for the time being. And at 90, we'll squash him back down. About 94, we'll stretch him back up. And then at 120, we'll squash him back down. That's when he lands. And let's take this empty we were using for height, and let's just nuke that. We don't need it anymore. All right, so now, if we scrub through, he is changing shape, but it looks really weird at the moment. Of course, part of that has to do with the fact that these keys are all linear, so you have this really straightforward kind of nasty relationship. What we want to see happen here is we want to kind of spring into a stretchy state, and then we're going to gradually start to shrink back down, and then only squash right as we impact the ground. So it's like he's going to get really elongated and slowly start to come back together, but then come back together and compress right as he touches the ground. Now to do that, we're going to take all of our keyframes. And we're going to start off by setting them all to Bezier. So hit the T key and change them all to Bezier. Now, with Bezier handles, you can still stretch one side out, and we're going to make a lot of use out of that by taking each one of our keys here, our upper keys, like the peaks, and we're going to stretch their handles out. And without even looking at the screen, think about the type of relationship we're defining as we do this. So we're popping to a stretch state, and we're kind of holding it and then gradually starting to get smaller. And then that rate of compression is going to accelerate. We're going to be going a lot faster, and then boom, we're going to pop right back out again, which is exactly what we want to see. Now, we can also take these points down here on the bottom. Let's hit the V key, and we'll set these to free. And we're going to make these into points, which means you're really going to feel that impact.
It's at this point that I'd be jumping up and down,
Yeah.
thinking about my knees.
Yeah. That's a good way to do it. Now, I'm not going to be worried about anything that takes place after frame 120. That's actually going to be part of your guys' assignment.
Did the keyframe prior or two prior to that one?
This
yeah.
one?
I think it got
Yeah, it
nudged.
did.
Yeah, it did.
There you go.
And I'll just pull this into a point and just hold there. And now as we scrub through, see, is that looking funny or is it just me? Well, the whole thing is looking funny, and part of the funniness is that our timing, while it's okay, it's not all that it could be. What we actually want to have happen is for all of these bounces to be offset by just a couple of frames. We basically want to slide everything back so that our squashing and stretching is no longer happening right on the bounce, it's happening right beforehand, and that's going to take our character and make it look less like he's rubbery and more like he's actually exerting force, like he's stretching in order to jump and push himself up into the air. So to do that, I'm going to hit the B key, and we'll just drag a box around all these keys. You can hit G, just like you do in the viewport, to move stuff around. And let me right-click, because I don't really want to move like that. We'll just hit G once. Then middle mouse drag to the left. And I want you to nudge everything back. Let's just try one frame at first. And if I hit Alt-A, and let me take my sync, and if I set that to frame dropping, am I still going to have... Yeah, that's... That bounce right there just looks strange somehow. But I can't tell if it's an update thing, because right now we've got so much going on this computer that it's not updating super nicely. My curves tell me that everything should be working okay. I'm also going to come down here to my timeline, and let me pause real quick. I'm going to set my end. Go ahead, sir.
It's hard to tell because of the capture rate, but I'm not. It doesn't. This is ironically, it doesn't appear that that bounce there he hits comes down to the ground. The first landing.
He may not be. So right about here.
That might be what's making it look.
Yeah, and that very well could be. We can adjust that just by tweaking our Z location. We are on the ball character keying set, so we can make updates to this. Just make sure if you do that, that you double check and make sure that you're right on the key itself. You don't want to add an extra keyframe where you don't need one. So we'd want to make sure we're actually right here. I think what's happening, I mean, because look, he is hitting the ground, but it's only for like a single frame. And so we're actually losing it in terms of, it's not just capture rate. The playback over here is a little sluggish as well. But I mean, we have, I don't know, 20 apps running right now. So it's not particularly surprising. If I go frame by frame through it, things are looking pretty good. The only thing I might do if I was going to tweak this out, and tweaking is not something I'm going to spend a ton of time on in this video, is maybe take these guys and nudge them back one more frame. So he seems to kind of kick out a little bit faster. But again, it's kind of hard to say if that's going to help too much without doing like a quick OpenGL render, which is, I just want to point this out. If you're following along, very much like we did with the Animatics, if you want to see what this looks like as an animation and play through it in a media player, you can do an OpenGL render animation, and that will render what you see in the viewport, as opposed to having to process all the lighting. It's a fast way to get a preview. Not something I'm going to do on camera, though. Whoop, right-click. And I'm so used to release confirming, so when it doesn't do that, sometimes I get a little thrown off. I'm liking the feel of that. Now, understanding fully that I'm scrubbing and things are moving in slow motion, that's feeling a lot better to me. And of course, like everything, depending on your relationships and how you've set everything up to this point, your mileage may vary.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid backseat animating.
Yeah, and that's yeah.
This is your animation. I'm not going to get. I'm like, I would do this.
Right. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to animate is going to be the bending back and forth. So I'll go ahead and hide this curve, and we'll just come over here to bend, and you see that we only have a single keyframe, which is fine. We'll start off... Actually, let's start off at about... I think for the study guide, for the notes, I just kind of gave you guys some keys and some values to kind of help you out. So, I mean, we could just animate it that way. But the idea, basically, before we even just go through and add stuff in, is we're doing the exact same thing in reverse. We want him to be bent, I believe it's backward as he makes each jump. So it's kind of like he's throwing his chest out and really going into each jump. And as he's coming down, we want him to start to look down, like he's anticipating coming in contact with the ground. So we're going to start off way back here at frame 24. So before he even moves, we're going to go ahead and zero him out. So let's go ahead and we'll just drop a key. Actually, we have a perfectly good key just sitting right here that we could borrow. So if I just take the active keyframe, his value is currently set to 0. I could just take that and set that to 24. And we can just use that guy, which is pretty handy. All right, so let's start off by going into that first jump. And I'll go ahead and close this out so we don't really need to see it. And we'll take our bend and pull it back. Because he's about to go airborne right now. So we really want him to kind of be puffing himself out a little bit. And then we'll come up here to right when he lands. So at frame 60. But then I'm actually going to go one frame back. So right before he makes impact, he's going to be looking down. So we'll put it right at frame 59. And we'll take our bend and rotate it forward. Now it's a linear relationship, but we can scrub through it nice and slowly and kind of see what this does. He's back, and then he starts to look down. And now he's ready to go into his next jump.
Nice.
So we'll go to about frame 63, so just a few frames later, and we'll lean him back again. Once again, actual values are not as important as looking at your character and seeing what his pose is going to be. We'll come up here to frame 90, back up one frame, and make him look down again. And I'll just bring this one down and kind of even it out with the other one. I just clicked and dragged on the keyframe itself to move it down a little. All right, so next we'll jump forward about 4 or 5 frames. Rock our character back again. And then he needs to land on that last key. And since he's coming in for a landing right about here, we'll just set our bend over to 0. Because he's not going into another jump at this point. Now, of course, these linear relationships aren't going to look very good, so I'm just going to grab all of my keys. Let's hit T and switch these over to Bezier. Also, immediately go ahead and hit V, and, well, I don't need to free them up, really. The bottom ones, the top ones in this case, because I've reversed my curve from what I built last time around. These are going to need to have free handles, so I can turn them into points. And even that is probably not going to be that important here, because you notice we're getting really fine-grained shape here. It's probably not going to change that much. Let's just try avoiding it and see if we can get away without it right now. So same as before, we want this change to be fast when he first goes into a jump, but then a gradual change as he's coming back down. Now, this is where animation curves are fun to really pay attention to, because this upward sweep of the curve means that he's gradually looking down, and it's always good to remember that, you know, sometimes the value and what you're actually animating is going to be reversed from the shape of the curve. You should try as much as you can not to associate the shape of a curve with what is literally taking place on the screen. All right, so now let's scrub through again, and he looks up and hurls himself up. The last thing I want to do is we're going to take all of our keys. So let's hit B, and I'll drag a box around everybody. And just as before, we're going to nudge these back just a couple of frames. So we'll hit G and just scoot them back one frame. And that just gives us a little bit more anticipation. So now he really is starting that initial kick right before he hits the ground and hurling himself up into the air. And really, that's all there is to it. We now have a very nice bounce that gets us all the way up to the top of the hill. And we're ready to move on from here. Now, that is the length of the animation I'm actually going to demonstrate. You have seen how to place keyframes, and you have seen how to edit them. Everything else is really just playing with these sliders and animating them here and there. I want to know if there are any questions before we go any further. Because after this, we're going to discuss your assignment for next week. And I'm not seeing any stuff. No, I'm not actually going to do the wobble keys. I just threw those there into the notes to help you guys out. If you've never actually done a wobble before, it will make your life easier to have something to get you kind of started. But really, all you're doing is making a zigzaggy curve that gets smaller as it goes forward. That's it. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So let's talk about what you guys are responsible for your assignment. Basically, you're going to be responsible for this motion. And I realize, again, everybody's frame rate probably just hit the toilet. So let me get something a little smaller here. You've already got this part. It's done. He gets all the way up to the top of the hill. But there is one extra thing going on here that I didn't do in the video. I am going to mention it. His club is not staying perfectly stationary. There's a little bit of up and down to the club that's taking place along with those jumps. And think about it. Like, grab something that's got any kind of weight to it, hold it in your hand, and jump up and down, and watch what your hands do. They have kind of a little sinusoidal motion of their very own that's going to be a little separate from your body. So keep that in mind. But it's easy. It's real easy to do. All right, he's going to look down. Club will go into position. He'll do a swing, and he'll just kind of watch it go off into the distance, and the club will come back around. Now, I will make sure that this video, if it hasn't already, gets put up for everybody to watch as a reference. You should already have your animatics, though, and that should make things a little easier. So, this is what you're responsible for, is basically creating all of this motion. Are there any questions? All right, let me jump over to Photoshop, and I'll write that down just in case there's anybody following along on the video who's doing a terrible amount of scrubbing, because then they don't hear me speak. And I hear you, Heinrich. I'll get to that here in just a second. So he wants to see the UVs for the golf club, which I'll show here momentarily. So you need the completed animation. Things not shown in the video. We'll call it Club Wobble as he jumps up the hill. Landing jiggle. I don't know what I was just trying to write there. My brain kind of shut down while I was writing. Swing and follow through. And then finally, don't forget the ball and the tee. Remember those. Basically, they need to disappear. I mean, if we go back to the video, The way that swing takes place, and again, I know you guys probably have terrible frame rates at this point. Just watch the ball and the tee very closely. Really, they just disappear when the club comes through. Whack, and they're gone. And I want to see some kind of follow-through. It doesn't have to be anything extravagant. I just want to see that you guys can knock this out. And really, with the rig that we've created, this entire process is going to be very, very simple. You're most of the way done now. As a matter of fact, the hard part is just getting him to bounce up the hill. And we've covered that on video. Everything else is super, super, super easy. Now, somebody said they wanted to see the UV layout of the club, and I said I would do it. So here I go. Let's see here. I'm going to put away the graph editor. We'll split this guy this way, turn this over into an image editor, grab you over here, and let's see. Let's just set this over to something. Here you go. The only thing I did that's even remotely fancy is I took the UVs for the handle and I straightened them out into a nice straight grid. And if I hit Alt-Z over here, you can see the result that had. Let's see, let's pull this guy out real quick. That just allowed me to have some nice straight lines around the handle. And that's not even a part of the geometry at all, as you can see. That's just there because there's a little bit of bump mapping going on and some shading. So yeah, very, very simple. And I did make a specularity channel, just showing off and stuff. And you'll notice that the wood actually has a little bit of color in the specularity channel, and it just adds a nice kind of lustrous sheen to the whole thing. And somebody said, I wish you would make a little video for the club like you did with the golf ball, which was awesome. I might give you, how about like a little overview video where I'll just kind of open it up and I'll go through the process, but I won't redo the whole thing right there in front of you. I think I could probably be sweet-talked into doing that. And somebody said, can you please show again what the bend property does? I'm still having massive problems with my bending orientation. Well, the bending is going to give you headaches if you are not careful, mostly because of that orientation issue. You have to remember the purpose of the bend modifier is to bend around the z-axis. So what you actually probably need to see more than anything is the following. First off, the bend itself, it is attached to a deformer, so it has an origin deformer that is set to relative. That's important. Both of those are hugely important. Now, that empty that we're using, if I go under ball control and grab the bend deformer empty, has been rotated around Y by 90 degrees. Because we are bending around the Z-axis. And by spinning that thing around 90 degrees, we bend in the proper direction. At least that's how I handled it. Did you do an ambient occlusion on the club? No. The thing waves around so much that I didn't really see a point. Really, to be honest, the biggest reason I did the ambient occlusion thing in the first place on the character was not really because it makes the character look awesome, which it kind of does. It was really just to show you guys how to bake out ambient occlusion and work it into a texture. I just thought it'd be a cool thing to show. And are there any other questions? If not, I'll make sure that this is something close to what people see at the very end, if they're scrubbing around. And that is going to wrap things up for this class. So thank everyone. Thank you all for attending. And if you're watching this later and enjoying it, thank you, because that means you're a member sponsor, and we appreciate you, and we love you. One last quick question. Can you repeat all the steps we did during this entire lesson, please?
All right, that's pretty much it.
Yes, I can. Actually, I can when you watch the recorded video.
That's true.
And you guys all have yourselves a great rest of your weekend, and we'll catch you all next week.
Don't forget, when open office hours gets posted, join in. Also, if you get stuck and you're unable to attend open office hours, do not fear the PM button.
Nah, just PM me and let me know, and I'll help you any way I can. And also, don't be afraid to email me your scene files if you're really just dead stuck. You want me to have a look. Just if you do that, send me a PM saying that you did that. Because I lose stuff in my email inbox all the time because it just gets flooded. And
Annie, yeah, we post about the open office hours in the member sponsor form, but make the live classes calendar your favorite place.
Yeah, bookmark that and look at it all the time.
Because just check the calendar and you'll see things updating all the time there. That calendar is actually becoming pretty full now.
Yeah.
And I'm just updating the thread where you put your notes with a screenshot of that,
Okay.
what is showing now on the
Cool.
screen.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Well, everyone, you guys have a fantastic weekend. And for those of you that are in the C# class, I'll see you on Monday.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.